Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where ambition freezes solid and the horizon swallows hope whole. You've survived Monday mornings, maybe even a cross-country road trip with your family. But let's be real, you probably won't survive this either. It's June 15th, 1910, and you're standing on the docks at Cardiff, Wales, watching sailors load supplies onto a ship that looks like it's already given up. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to chase you across the Ross Ice Shelf over it, and hey, drop your city and the time you're watching this down in the comments. I love knowing who else is awake during these quiet hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Terra sits low in the water, groaning under the weight of 3 motor sledges, 19 confused Siberian ponies, and enough tinned food to last maybe half as long as this journey actually will. Listen to the creak of wooden crates being hauled aboard, the sharp whistle of the boatswain, and the nervous whinny of horses that have never seen snow. The air smells of coal smoke, fish guts, and the collective optimism of 65 men who don't know they're sailing toward disaster. You're one of them. Maybe you're a sailor looking for adventure, or a scientist chasing glory, or just someone who needed a job and thought Antarctica sounded exotic. Spoiler alert, exotic isn't the word you'll use later. The word you'll use rhymes with nightmare, but with more frostbite and screaming honies. Captain Robert Falcon, Scot, paces the deck, his naval uniform crisp, his jaw set with the determination of someone who's never truly failed at anything important. He's 42, old enough to know better, young enough to think he's invincible. He's not. None of you are. Antarctica doesn't care about your Royal Navy commission or your medals from previous expeditions. It only cares whether you brought enough calories, and Scott didn't. Here's a historical fact that should chill you more than any polar wind. This expedition cost $40,000, half from public donations, half from a government that would rather buy battleships. For comparison, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen's expedition costs a fraction of this and will succeed spectacularly. Why? Because Amundsen spent money on things that actually work, like dogs and food and not dying. You help load one of the motor sledges. The thing weighs more than 3 polar bears wrestling and costs £1,000, 7 times the price of all the horses combined. Someone with spectacular sideburns assures everyone these mechanical marvels will revolutionise polar travel. In about 6 months, one will sink through ice during unloading. The other 2 will freeze solid and become very expensive tent anchors. But right now, they represent the future, and the future is shiny and British and completely unprepared for temperatures below freezing. The ponies are worse. 19 Siberian creatures who look around Cardiff docks like they're wondering what cosmic injustice landed them here. They're supposed to haul supplies across the Ross Ice Shelf, and if you know anything about ponies, or ice, or basic physics, you're already seeing the problem. Their hooves will break through snow crust with every step. They'll sweat during exertion, and that sweat will freeze to their coats. They can't eat seal meat, so they'll need tons of fodder that takes up space better used for, say, human food. And unlike dogs, they can't pull sledges efficiently in deep snow. But hey, at least they're trying, which is more than you can say for British planning. Lawrence Oates, the cavalry officer in charge of the ponies, already knows they're doomed. You see it in his eyes, that resigned look of someone who's tried to warn people but nobody listened. He did tell Scott. Scott didn't care. Scott, you're beginning to realise, doesn't listen to much except his own internal narrative of British exceptionalism. This is like entering an ultra-marathon, but insisting you'll also complete a dissertation, learn violin, and maintain proper tea service along the route. You can have ambitious goals, or you can have survival. Scott wants both. The ice will choose for him. Night falls, and below deck you claim a hammock that smells like whoever slept in it during the last voyage, and possibly died there. The canvas scratches your cheek. Above you, boots thud on deck. Below, the hull groans against the dock. Around you, men breathe in the darkness, each carrying their own private fear about what waits in the ice. You close your eyes and think, just for a moment, about turning back. You won't, though. None of them will. Because the thing about doomed expeditions is that from the inside they never feel doomed. They feel like adventure. 3 weeks out of Cardiff, the Southern Ocean decides to remind everyone that water can be a weapon. The waves don't just rock the ship. They pick it up and slam it down like a toddler having a tantrum with a toy boat. You're below deck, trying to keep breakfast inside your body, and failing spectacularly. The smell down here defies description. 65 men in close quarters, most seasick, none able to bathe, all discovering that vegetarian diets would have been a tactical advantage. The air tastes like vomit and despair, with notes of wet wool and regret. Someone near you prays in Welsh. Another man curses in Sailor Easy, which is like regular cursing but with more creative uses of marine equipment. Listen to the wind howl through the rigging, a banshee stream that cuts through wood and rope and optimism. Feel the ship lurch. Your stomach drops as the floor becomes a wall, then a ceiling, then something gravity forgot how to define. You grab a support beam, splinters digging into your palm, and hold on like it's the only thing between you and the cold embrace of the Southern Ocean. It is. Here's your historical nightmare fuel. In earlier December 1910, Terra encounters a storm that nearly sinks her. Waves as tall as buildings crash over the deck. Pumps fail. The crew bails water by hand using buckets for hours. 2 ponies drown. A dog is washed overboard. 10 tons of coal and 65 gallons of precious fuel oil vanish into the sea. And everyone aboard realizes this is just the ocean having a normal Tuesday. Antarctica itself hasn't even started trying to kill you yet. You climb topside because being above in a storm somehow seems preferable to smelling the consequences below. The wind hits you like a frozen fist wrapped in razor wire. Rain, or is it sea spray? Both? Does it matter? Lashes your face until your skin feels sanded. You grab a rope to avoid being thrown overboard and watch waves bigger than houses roll toward the ship with the inevitability of a mortgage payment. The ponies below are screaming. You hear them even over the storm, high-pitched wails of animal terror that cut through wind and rain and the shouting of desperate men. Christopher, the pony you helped load back in Cardiff, is down there somewhere, probably convinced he's dying. He's not wrong, his death is just postponed, not cancelled. The ship lurches, and you slide across the deck until your back slams into the mast. Your ribs feel kicked by one of those ponies. You taste blood, bit your tongue on impact. Around you, men do the same frantic dance. Grab, slip, catch yourself, hold on, repeat. It's like the world's most dangerous carnival ride, except the carnival is actively trying to kill you, and there's no one to comp you a funnel cake afterward. Lieutenant Edward Evans appears through the chaos like a ghost in oilskins, shouting orders the wind eats. You lip read more than hear. Pump, starboard, now, men scramble. You scramble with them because standing still means dying. The pump room is a fresh circle of hell. Water sloshes at your knees, cold as malice and rising fast. The pump itself is a manual beast, all iron and effort. You join the line, throwing weight against handles that don't want to move, pulling levers that fight back. Your shoulders burn, your hands slip. Someone behind you falls. Someone else drags him up. The rhythm never stops. Push, pull, push, pull. Like the world's worst gym membership that's trying to kill you. Hours pass, or maybe minutes that feel like hours. Time becomes liquid in storms, stretching and compressing based on how much you hate your current situation. The water level stops rising. Then it drops. The pump, through mechanical spite and human stubbornness, is winning. You emerge back on deck to find the storm easing. The waves are merely terrifying now instead of apocalyptic. Dawn breaks grey and grudging, like even the sun doesn't want to look at this mess. Men collapse where they stand, too exhausted to make it below. You sit with your back against a crate and watch the ocean roll, huge, indifferent, absolutely willing to finish the job next time. Someone mentions the ponies. 2 are dead, drowned in their stalls when water flooded the hold. Their bodies will be pushed overboard, a burial at sea for animals who never wanted to be at sea. The surviving ponies are traumatized, eyes rolling, refusing to eat. Oates, looking like he hasn't slept in days, he hasn't, just shakes his head. They were poor before and, he mutters, now they're ruined. The storm is actually practice. The Southern Ocean is Antarctica's bouncer, checking if you're tough enough for the really exclusive club. You just barely got in. The main event hasn't even started. December 10th, 1910. You hit pack ice, and it's not the crushing, ship-destroying bergs of your nightmares. It's worse. Thousands of smaller ice chunks jammed together, like a frozen traffic jam stretching to every horizon. Terra has to ram through it, engines straining, hull groaning, progress measured in yards per hour. You stand at the rail and watch ice scrape along the ship's side. The sound is nails on a chalkboard made of bone. Scratchy, persistent, the kind that gets inside your skull and redecorates. Listen to it. Screech, crack, thud, screech, crack, thud. A rhythm that will haunt your dreams if you're lucky enough to have any. Penguins watch from ice floes, heads cocking with curiosity. They look at you like they're trying to figure out if you're food or entertainment. Spoiler, you're neither. You're just another group of humans making terrible decisions with impressive conviction. The penguins have seen this before. They know how it ends. For 20 days you're trapped. The ice doesn't care about your schedule, your ambitions, or the fact that somewhere out there Roald Amundsen might already be ahead. It just sits there, frozen and smug, daring you to pass. The ship burns 6 tons of coal per day, keeping engines running, trying to push through. That's fuel you'll need later. Fuel that's now smoke hanging over ice that will still be here long after you're gone. The monotony becomes its own torture. Wake up, shovel coal, eat terrible food, stare at ice that looks exactly like yesterday's ice, sleep fitfully in a hammock that smells like despair. At least when the ship was sinking you had something to do. Now you just wait. And waiting in the cold is like watching paint dry if paint drying could kill you through boredom and frostbite. The scientists try staying busy. Edward Wilson sketches ice formations, his pencil moving across paper with the patience of someone who genuinely finds beauty in frozen water. Herbert Ponting photographs icebergs from every angle, creating art from the prison walls surrounding you. He helped with daily ice measurements, 12 feet thick, 15 feet, 20 feet. Thick ice should be comforting, but it's not. Thick ice means trapped, stuck going nowhere, while Amundsen is probably already setting up camp. The dogs seem to love it. They're out on the ice, playing, fighting, rolling in snow like this is the best vacation ever. Their Arctic ancestry remembers this cold. Their bodies built for temperatures that make humans whimper. You watch them and feel jealous. They're happier frozen in pack ice than you've been in months. The ponies, meanwhile, are slowly losing their minds. Confined to stalls, unable to run, eating fodder that tastes like compressed sadness. They pace and stamp and occasionally scream for no reason except that screaming seems appropriate. Oates spends hours with them, talking in low tones, checking hooves, doing everything a good cavalryman does. But you see in his face that he knows these animals are already ghosts, just waiting for all their bodies to catch up. Christmas 1910 arrives while you're trapped. Someone decorates the mess with tinsel that looks absurd against utilitarian wood and iron. The cook prepares roast mutton that actually tastes like something other than salted leather, plum pudding with brandy that burns going down, and enough alcohol rations to make everyone forget they're trapped in ice at the bottom of the world. Men sing carols, voices rough but earnest. God rest ye merry gentlemen echoes through the hold. And for a moment you remember what Christmas used to feel like when you weren't sailing toward probable death. Scott gives a speech about perseverance and British spirit, and how next Christmas you'll all be home as heroes. Men cheer because cheering is what you do when your commander speaks, but you see the doubt in their eyes. Heroes require success. Right now, success looks like maybe not being trapped in ice forever. Finally, December 30th, the ice breaks. Not dramatically. No cracking thunder, no sudden release. Just a gradual loosening, pressure easing, leads of open water appearing between flows. Terra nudges forward, then forward again, engines chugging, and suddenly you're moving. Actually moving, and everyone crowds the deck to watch ice fall away like chains being unlocked. Antarctica appears on the horizon. White cliffs rising from grey water, mountains in the distance wearing clouds like crowns, glaciers flowing to the sea like frozen rivers of time. It's beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful, elegant, purposeful, and absolutely capable of killing you. Mount Erebus dominates the skyline, an active volcano spewing smoke into polar air because apparently Antarctica decided one existential threat wasn't enough. The mountain rises 12 to 48 feet, named after the Greek god of darkness, which seems about right. January 4th, 1911. You arrive at Cape Evans. The ship anchors in water so clear you can see the bottom, volcanic rock, sea urchins, fish that shouldn't exist in water this cold but do anyway. The anchor drops with a splash that echoes off ice cliffs. and just like that, you're here. Antarctica. The last place on Earth anyone discovered, and the first place anyone smart avoids. You made it. You're here, and now the real nightmare begins. January 5th, 1911. You're standing on volcanic rock covered in snow, holding a hammer so cold it feels like it's burning your palm through wool mittens. Welcome to Cape Evans, where the view is spectacular and the survival rate is questionable. Around you, men unload the Terra like it's a moving day from hell, except instead of furniture you're hauling scientific instruments, seal meat, and the crushing weight of British expectations. The hut goes up fast, prefabricated wooden panels shipped from England, where builders apparently assumed Antarctic winds would be gentle. The structure is 50 feet by 25 feet, insulated with seaweed because someone thought dried ocean plants would keep out temperatures that regularly drop below -40. Listen to the wind howl through gaps in the boards, a constant whistling that sounds like the continent itself is laughing at your construction choices. You help nail boards while wind tries to steal them from your hands. Each hammer below echoes across the ice, sharp cracks that make your teeth hurt. Feel the vibration through your frozen fingers. The wood so cold it's brittle, threatening to split with every nail. The smell is sharp, fresh cut timber mixing with seal blubber someone's rendering nearby, creating an aroma that's half sawmill, half fish market, all awful. Here's your historical reality check. The hut is divided by a wall of packing crates into officers' quarters and enlisted men's quarters. Even at the literal end of the earth, the British class system remains fully operational. Officers get the slightly better bunks, a separate table, and the privilege of making terrible decisions without input from people who actually know what they're doing. You're on the enlisted side, which means cramped conditions, less space, and the knowledge that you'll die following orders from men who've never manhauled a sledge in their lives. The sleeping arrangements are grim. Bunks stacked too high, thin mattresses stuffed with straw that crackles when you move. Sleeping bags made of reindeer fur that smell like every reindeer who died to make them. At night, lying in your bunk, you listen to the hut breathe. Wood creaking under temperature stress, wind howling yet outside, ice groaning beneath the building's weight like the earth itself is complaining about the extra occupancy. Imagine camping in a wooden shipping container furnished by people who read about comfort in a book once but never experienced it, while living with 64 roommates who all snore different songs. That's home now. Get comfortable. The stove in the centre burns coal and seal blubber, producing heat and smoke in roughly equal proportions. The smoke stings your eyes and coats everything in a thin film of oily residue that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel clean again. But the heat is worth Ishtar. Feel it radiating outward, creating a bubble of almost comfortable warmth within 10 feet of the stove. Beyond that, you might as well be outside. Food situation, monotonous and inadequate. Breakfast is porridge that could double as mortar, thick grey and about as appetizing as wet cement. Lunch is pemmican hoosh, a stew made from dried meat, fat and denial. Dinner is more hoosh, maybe with seal meat if you're lucky, which you're not. Seal tastes like fish had a baby with liver and raised it on a diet of pure fish oil. The aftertaste lingers like regret, coating your mouth in an oily film that no amount of tea can wash away. Biscuits come with every meal. Ship's biscuits hard enough to crack teeth, which means you suck on them like Antarctic jawbreakers until they soften enough to chew. One sailor jokes that if they run out of ammunition, they can throw biscuits at polar bears. Nobody laughs because it's not actually funny, just true. The cook, Thomas Clissold, does his best with ingredients that fight back. He boils, fries, and roasts seal meat into various textures of terrible. The tinned beef tastes like the tin. The preserved vegetables have the consistency of sadness. And the tea is strong enough to strip paint but weak enough to be disappointing, which perfectly summarises the entire British approach to this expedition. Herbert Ponting sets up his darkroom in a corner, capturing everything. Men hauling sledges, ponies in the snow, icebergs at sunset, the slow grinding reality of polar life. His photos will become iconic, proof that the British were here, doing British things Britishly. But right now he's just another person taking up space and eating rations, while producing nothing that keeps anyone warm. Though to be fair, his documentation will outlive everyone here, frozen moments of men who froze to death. At night, Scott gives lectures leadership in polar environments, the history of Antarctic exploration, why man-hauling builds character and dogs are morally suspect. That last one isn't the real title, but it might as well be. You sit through these because attendance is mandatory and sleeping through them is frowned upon. You learn things mostly about Scott's unshakable confidence in methods that have already failed. The days blur into routine. Wake at 7 a.m. to a bell that sounds like it's mocking you. Breakfast at 8, work parties by 9, some haul supplies, some hunt seals, some maintain equipment, all slowly realise they are in over their heads. Listen to the crunch of boots on snow, the crack of picks breaking ice, the constant wind that never stops, not even for a second. You step outside to check weather instruments and the cold slaps you awake better than any coffee. Your breath freezes in your beard, forming icicles that click against your jacket like tiny frozen wind chimes. The air is so dry it hurts to breathe, each inhale scraping your lungs raw. But the sky is impossible. Stars so bright and numerous they look fake, the aurora australis dancing in green and purple curtains, Mount Erebus smoking in the distance like a god who's mildly annoyed with existence. This is home now, a wooden box on volcanic rock at the edge of the world surrounded by ice that wants you dead and men who don't know they're doomed yet. You crawl into your sleeping bag, pull reindeer fur up to your chin, and listen to the hut settle. Tomorrow you start depot laying, hauling supplies south to prepare for the pole attempt. But tonight, for just a moment, you're warm, almost comfortable, nearly safe. Spoiler. None of those things will last. January 24, 1911. You're standing beside a sledge loaded with supplies, staring south across the Ross Ice Shelf, a flat white expanse that stretches to the horizon, like someone spilled Antarctica and forgot to clean it up. This is depot laying, the practice run for the pole attempt. The plan is simple. Haul supplies south, cache them at strategic points, return to base. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. And most of it will. The sledge weighs approximately as much as your will to live, which is to say heavy and getting heavier. You're one of 13 men on this journey, along with 8 ponies and 2 dog teams. The temperature hovers around -20 Fahrenheit, which Scott describes as bracing, and you would describe as, my face is actively trying to fall off. Listen to the scrape of sledge runners on ice, a grinding screech that burrows into your skull and sets up permanent residence. Feel the harness digging into your shoulders as you lean forward, throwing weight against resistance, muscles burning, lungs screaming, every breath a knife of frozen air. The rhythm becomes your entire world. Pull, step, pull, step, pull, step. It's meditation through suffering, enlightenment through frostbite. The ponies are struggling immediately. Their hooves break through the snow crust with every step, sinking them chest deep in the powder. Watch them flail, panic, exhaust themselves within hours. Their sweat freezes to their coats, creating armour of ice that weighs them down and steals their body heat. Oates was right. These animals are doomed, and bringing them here was animal cruelty disguised as expedition planning. It's like bringing a goldfish to the Sahara, then being surprised when it struggles. Except the goldfish is a 1,000-pound pony and the Sahara is frozen and wants everything dead. You make camp that first night, erecting tents with fingers so numb you can barely feel the poles. The tent fabric cracks and snaps in the wind, stiff as cardboard, fighting every attempt to secure it. Inside, you huddle in sleeping bags while someone lights the primer stove. A tiny, roaring demon that provides just enough heat to remind you what warmth used to feel like without actually delivering it. Dinner is hoosh again, because of course it is. The pemmican bubbles in the pot, releasing steam that immediately freezes to the inside of the tent, creating a coating of frost that will drip on you all night. Taste the fat on your tongue, greasy and heavy, coating your mouth. The biscuits require 15 minutes of lucking before they're soft enough to chew. Someone jokes about how this builds character, but he laughs. Characters don't need building when they're freezing to death. Here's your disturbing historical fact. Scott's daily ration is calculated at 4,500 calories per person. Modern nutritionists estimate you need 6,000 to 7,000 calories per day in extreme cold while doing hard physical labour. The deficit is built in from the start. You're going to starve slowly, by design, and call it character building. The British approach to everything, really, make it harder than necessary, then act like suffering proves superiority. Days pass in endless repetition. Wake frozen, eat inadequate breakfast, haul sledges south, make camp, eat inadequate dinner, sleep inadequately, repeat. The landscape never changes, just white ice in every direction, flat and featureless as a nightmare about boredom. No landmarks, no variation, just emptiness that goes on forever. It's like being trapped inside a blank page. One pony collapses on day 3. Watch Oates approach it slowly, checking its breathing, running his hands over trembling flanks. He knows what comes next. The shot echoes across the ice shelf, sharp and final. The pony drops, silence follows, heavy and accusing. The carcass is butchered for dog food. Steam rising from warm organs hitting frozen air, the smell of blood sharp and copper against the clean ice scent. Listen to the dogs howling that night, an eerie chorus that sounds like grief or hunger or both. They know what that meat means. They're eating their former travelling companions, and they don't care because dogs understand survival in ways humans pretend not to. By February 17th, you've hauled supplies 150 miles south and established 1-ton depot, a cache of food and fuel marked by a black flag on a bamboo pole. This depot will become famous later, for all the wrong reasons. Spoiler alert, it's not far enough south, and that mistake will kill people. But right now, it just looks like a pile of boxes in the middle of nowhere, utterly inadequate for the vast emptiness surrounding it. The return journey is worse. You're tired now, depleted, running on fumes and stubbornness. 3 more ponies collapse and are shot. Feel the shock of each gunshot in your chest. A percussion that reminds you everything here dies eventually. You're just waiting your turn. The dogs pull efficiently, tongues lolling, tails wagging, thriving in conditions that are killing everything else. Scott watches them with visible distrust, like they're cheating at survival. You stagger back into Cape Evans on March 22nd, 57 days after departing, having lost 5 ponies, accomplished the bare minimum, and learned exactly how unprepared everyone is for what comes next. But Scott calls it a success. The supplies are cached, the route is scouted, the men are experienced now. You don't mention that experienced means we now know how terrible this will be, because nobody wants to hear it. That night, lying in your bunk back at the hut, you listen to men snore and cough and shift in their sleep. Outside, wind hammers the walls, the stove radiates fading warmth. You think about that depot 50 miles south, a tiny cache of supplies in an infinite waste of ice. You think about the ponies, shot and butchered. You think about Scott's confidence, unshaken despite everything. And you wonder, not for the first time, but maybe for the first time you admit it, if any of you will survive this. June 27th, 1911. You're standing outside the hut at Cape Evans in complete darkness. Not twilight, not dim light. Absolute, crushing blackness that presses against your eyeballs like a physical thing. The sun hasn't risen in 2 months, and won't for another 2. Winter in Antarctica is darkness made solid, cold made infinite, and right now 3 men are preparing to walk 60 miles into it to steal penguin eggs. This is quite possibly the stupidest idea in the history of stupid ideas, and you're not even going, you get to watch the stupid happen from relative safety. Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers and Apsley Cherry Garrard are packing for what will later be called the worst journey in the world, and it's not hyperbole. The temperature is minus 40 Fahrenheit. In a few days it will drop to minus 77. At these temperatures, your breath freezes with a hiss, your teeth crack from thermal shock, and your sleeping bag freezes solid with your own sweat, requiring 30 minutes of body heat to soften enough to climb inside. Listen to them loading their sledge, the clink of tin cans, the rustle of reindeer fur sleeping bags already stiff with cold, the quiet murmuring of men who know they might not come back. The air smells like nothing, cold as frozen even scent molecules into submission. Every breath burns your lungs, rasping down your throat like inhaling ground glass. Feel the cold pressing against every exposed inch of skin, searching for weaknesses, finding them. Why are they doing this? Emperor penguin eggs. Wilson believes studying penguin embryos at various developmental stages will prove evolutionary links between birds and reptiles. To get embryos, you need eggs. To get eggs in winter, you must walk 60 miles to Cape Crozier in the dark, in the worst cold on Earth, risking death for science that could be done literally anywhere else with less murder cold. It's like deciding to validate a hypothesis by walking barefoot across broken glass while being pelted with frozen hammers. Sure, you'll prove something, but was it worth it? Spoiler, no. They depart into darkness, 3 tiny lights from kerosene lamps swallowed almost immediately by the void. You watch them, disappear and wonder if you'll see them again. The answer is yes, but only technically. They'll come back changed, hollowed out, rebuilt from stubbornness and frostbite. You learn later what those 19 days were like. The cold so intense that pulling sledges felt like dragging concrete through molasses. Sweat from exertion freezing instantly, coating their bodies in ice armour that wouldn't melt even inside their sleeping bags. Each night required an hour of work just to set up the tent in the screaming wind, fingers fumbling with frozen canvas that cracked like parchment. The darkness was total. No moon, no stars, just black pressing in from all sides. They navigated by dim lamplight that illuminated maybe 5 feet ahead, turning the journey into a slow crawl through an endless frozen tunnel. Imagine walking through your house blindfolded. Except the house is made of ice, wants you dead, and occasionally throws crevasses in your path for variety. At Cape Crozier, they built a stone igloo, stacked rocks with frozen hands, stuffed gaps with snow, and called it shelter. Then a blizzard hit. The wind ripped away their tent, their only real protection, sending it tumbling into the darkness like hope getting a head start on leaving. Listen to Wilson describe it later. We heard the canvas flapping away in the distance. We knew we would die. But they didn't die. Somehow the tent snagged on rocks 200 yards away, and Bowers found it by crawling on hands and knees in hurricane-force winds in total darkness. That's not survival. That's spite in physical form, stubbornness wrestling death to a draw. They collected 5 emperor penguin eggs. 5. 3 broke, 2 made it back to England, were studied, and contributed almost nothing to evolutionary science. The entire journey, 19 days of literal hell, temperatures that should have killed them, suffering that broke teeth and spirits, yielded 2 eggs of questionable scientific value. When they stumbled back into Cape Evans on August 3rd, you barely recognised them. Cherry Garrard's face was black with frostbite, his lips cracked and bleeding. Bowers looked like he'd aged 20 years, eyes sunken, movements slow and stiff. Wilson maintained his calm exterior, but something had changed. His hand shook when he held his teacup, a tremor that would never fully go away. They didn't talk much about it at first. What do you say about walking into darkness so complete it felt like drowning in ink? About cold so intense it turned sleeping bags into torture devices? About facing death so many times you stopped counting and just kept walking? Cherry Garrard would later write a book about it, calling it the worst journey in the world. Critics thought it was hyperbole, but it wasn't. To this day, historians debate whether any journey before or since has matched it for sheer unnecessary suffering in pursuit of marginal scientific gain. They did all this, all the frostbite, terror, and near-death voluntarily. Nobody forced them, they chose this. And when they got back, Scott's response was basically, "Good work, now rest up because we're going to the pole soon and that'll be worse." That night, sitting around the stove, Cherry Garrard had quietly mentioned that during the worst moment, trapped in the igloo without a tent, he had accepted death completely. "It was rather peaceful, actually," he said, staring into his tea. "The fear stopped. That was the worst part, realising I'd stopped being afraid because there was no point anymore." Nobody knew what to say to that. So you sat in silence, listening to the wind outside, the fire crackling, and thought about how there are still months before the pole attempt. Months before the real test. Months before Scott leads 5 men south to die. You crawl into your bunk that night and pull the sleeping bag close. It's frozen around the edges. Your sweat from last night now ice. You think about Cherry Garrard's words, about fear stopping, about acceptance. You think about penguin eggs costing everything and meaning nothing. And you drift towards sleep, wondering if courage and stupidity might be the same thing, just measured at different distances from success. November 1st, 1911. You stand on the ice outside Cape Evans watching 15 men prepare to march south toward the pole, and the air crackles with tension thick enough to carve with a knife. This is it, the moment Scott's been preparing for, the reason 65 people sailed to the bottom of the world, the gamble that will either make him a hero or a cautionary tale. Spoiler, it's going to be the second one, but nobody knows that yet. The temperature hovers around -15 Fahrenheit. which Scott calls perfect travelling weather, and everyone else calls my face hurts and I haven't even started walking. Listen to the chaos. Dogs barking in their harnesses, ponies whinnying nervously, the 2 remaining motor sledges coughing black smoke like they're already dying. The air smells of diesel fumes, animal musk and collective anxiety masked as British confidence. You're not going south, you're staying at Cape Evans to maintain the base. Part of you is relieved. The other part feels guilty for that relief, like you're somehow failing by choosing survival over glory. It's like watching your friends jump off a bridge for TikTok views while you film from the shore. Technically, you're part of it, but you're also the only one not drowning. Scott emerges from the hut, his face set with determination that borders on delusion. He's planned everything down to the last detail, except for the details that actually matter, like bringing enough food or using dogs properly, or acknowledging that Roald Amundsen exists and is probably already ahead. The Norwegian explorer set up base at the Bay of Whales, 60 miles closer to the pole than Cape Evans, and brought 52 dogs plus men who actually know how to use them. But Scott doesn't talk about Amundsen. Talking about him would mean admitting this is a race, and races are ungentlemanly. Here's your historical fact that should terrify you. Scott's plan involves motor sledges until they break, they will, then ponies until they die, they will, then man-hauling, pulling sledges with human muscle, for the final push to the pole and all the way back. It's like planning a cross-country road trip using a car that's already broken, a horse that's already limping, and then deciding to push the car the rest of this way by hand, while the car is on fire, in Antarctica. The motor sledges start first, roaring to life with impressive mechanical bravado. Feel the vibration through your boots as they lurch forward, belching soak, tracks churning through snow. They look futuristic, powerful, unstoppable. They'll be stopped permanently within 5 days when the engine seize in the cold, leaving 2 very expensive monuments to British engineering hubris sitting uselessly on the ice. The pony teams follow, 10 surviving ponies, each loaded with supplies until they can barely move. Watch Oates lead them out, his face grim as a funeral director's. These animals are walking corpses, and he knows it. Their hooves sink through the snow crust with every step, crunch, struggle, heave, creating a rhythm of suffering that will continue until each one collapses and gets a bullet for its trouble. The pony's breath steams in the cold air, clouds of warmth that freeze instantly into ice crystals. Their eyes roll white with fear and exhaustion, and you wonder if animals can sense their own doom. Based on these ponies, the answer is yes. The dog teams are last, led by Cecil Mears and Dmitry Geroff. 33 dogs, eager and efficient, tongues lolling, tails wagging, thriving in conditions that are killing everything else. They understand cold, these animals. It's in their blood, their breeding, their entire evolutionary history. Watch them lean into their harnesses, pulling with joy rather than obligation. Scott watches them with a visible distrust, like they're cheating at survival by being good at it. If you were betting on which transportation method would work best, you'd pick the one that's been successfully used in the Arctic for thousands of years. Scott bets on the ones that look more impressive in newspaper photographs. Guess which approach wins races, and which one wins posthumous sympathy. The departure is surprisingly quiet. No cheering, no fanfare. Just men trudging south into white emptiness, growing smaller with each step until they're specks on the horizon, then nothing at all. Listen to the wind fill the silence they leave behind. A low moan across the ice that sounds like Antarctica something. More victims, right on schedule. You stand there long after they've vanished, staring south at nothing, and think about how 15 men just walked toward probable death with the confidence of people who think determination beats physics. 1 will turn back early with scurvy, 8 more will turn back after hauling supplies to various depots. The final 5, Scott, Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, Lawrence Oates and Edgar Evans, will reach the pole, find Amundsen got there first and die on the return journey. But right now they're just dots on the horizon, still convinced this is the story where the British win. That night, you lie in your bunk at Cape Evans, staring at the empty beds around you. The hut feels bigger now, emptier, echoing with absence. Outside, wind hammers the walls. The stove crackles, casting shadows that dance across empty spaces where men used to sit. You think about Scott's party. probably setting up camp right now, crawling into frozen sleeping bags, eating inadequate rations, telling themselves it'll get easier. It won't get easier. It will get exponentially worse in ways that will redefine what worse means. But you don't say that aloud because hope is sometimes all you have when reality is actively trying to kill you. You drift towards sleep, listening to the wind, and whisper a prayer to gods you don't believe in for men who probably won't make it back. November 6, 1911. 5 days into the journey, and the expedition is already bleeding momentum like a severed artery. You learn this later from the men who return, the stories of how everything Scott planned crumbled within a week, because Antarctica doesn't care about your plans, your confidence, or your empire's reputation. The motor sledges die first and die spectacularly. Imagine expensive machinery designed in England, tested nowhere near actual Antarctic conditions, and expected to function in temperatures that freeze metal and crack steel. The engines seize, the tracks lock, the fuel lines freeze solid. Within 5 days, both remaining sledges are abandoned on the ice. 2 tons of cutting-edge technology becoming very expensive paperweights. The support team has to man-haul the supplies the motors were supposed to carry, which means burning more calories they don't have and making slower progress than planned. Listen to Lieutenant Teddy Evans describe it later. The motors just stopped. We tried everything, heating the engines with blowtorches, thawing fuel lines, praying to the gods of mechanical engineering. Nothing. They sat there, frozen monuments to optimism, while we strapped ourselves to the sledges like pack animals and hauled them ourselves. It's like bringing an iPhone to a camping trip and being shocked when it dies in the cold, except this iPhone cost £1,000, and your entire expedition strategy depended on it scrolling you to the South Pole. The ponies are worse. The snow on the barrier isn't the firm packed surface Scott expected. It's soft, treacherous, bottomless in places. The ponies' hooves break through the crust with every step, plunging them chest deep into powder. Watch them struggle, heave, sink, panic, thrash, exhaust themselves. Repeat. Their sweat freezes to their coats instantly, creating ice armour that weighs them down and steals their body heat. They're dying by degrees, and everyone can see it. Oates does everything he can. He wraps their legs in blankets at night, rations their fodder carefully, talks to them in low, soothing tones that accomplish nothing except making himself feel slightly less guilty about leading them to slaughter. Feel the texture of frozen horsehide under your palm, stiff, cold, wrong. Smell the sharp animal panic sweat that even the cold can't completely freeze. Hear them whimper at night, soft sounds of exhausted misery that carry across the ice and burrow into your dreams. Here's your disturbing historical detail. The ponies are so weak that on November 24th, as they reach the bottom of the Beardmore Glacier, all remaining animals are shot. One by one, bang, bang, bang. Methodical executions of creatures who never asked to be here. The meat is cached for the return journey. Frozen carcasses left on the ice like waypoints of poor planning. Oates supervises each killing, his face expressionless, but you can see something break behind his eyes with each shot. He's a cavalry officer, he loves horses, and he's just executed 10 of them because someone else made terrible decisions. The dogs, meanwhile, are thriving. They pull their sledges efficiently, don't break through the snow, don't need special fodder. They eat pemmican same as the men, or they can eat seal meat cached along the route. Cecil Mears and Dmitry Gerov make better progress with dog teams than anyone else, which should tell Scott something about his transportation strategy. It doesn't. Scott still views dogs as morally inferior to suffering, which is very British and very stupid. The man-hauling begins earlier than planned because everything else failed. Strap yourself into a harness connected to a sledge weighing 200 pounds per man. Lean forward until the harness bites into your shoulders, dig your boots into the ice, and pull. Feel your muscles scream, your lungs burn, your back strain. The rhythm becomes your entire world. Step, pull, breathe. Step, pull, breathe. It's meditation through agony. Enlightenment through joint damage. Here's the thing about man-hauling that Scott never admits. It's hideously inefficient. Humans burn massive calories pulling heavy loads, which means you need more food, which means heavier sledges, which means burning more calories. It's a death spiral disguised as determination. Dogs pull more weight more efficiently while burning fewer calories relative to their body weight. But Scott believes man-hauling is more noble. which is like believing walking barefoot is more noble than wearing shoes. Sure, it's technically true, but it's also a fast track to frostbite and regret. The temperature drops as they move south. -20, -30, -40. At -40, your breath freezes in your beard, your eyelashes freeze, shut when you blink, and exposed skin develops frostbite in under 60 seconds. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's aggressive, seeking entry through every gap in your clothing, finding weakness in wrists and ankles and necks, freezing sweat against skin until you're wearing a shirt of ice that won't melt even when you're in your sleeping bag. Listen to Cherry Garrard describe sleeping bags. Getting into them required 30 minutes of struggle. The bags were frozen solid from our sweat, stiff as boards, and we'd have to lie on them, sit on them, beat them with our fists until our body heat softened them enough to wriggle inside. Then we'd lie there shivering for an hour before we got warm enough to sleep. The return journey will be worse. Right now, they're well-fed relatively, but fresh relatively, and going downhill on the schedule until Amundsen beats them. Coming back, they'll be starving, exhausted, and racing against time with no margin for error. But right now, morale is high because nobody's dead yet, and the worst is still ahead, unknown and therefore survivable in imagination. By December, they've reached the base of the Beardmore Glacier, a 125-mile frozen river climbing from sea level to 10,000 feet, crevassed and treacherous, and absolutely the last place you want to haul sledges by hand. The support parties are peeling off now, turning back north toward Cape Evans. The numbers dwindle, 15 becomes 12, then 8, then 5. You imagine what it's like to be in a support party, to haul supplies for weeks, suffer through cold and hunger and exhaustion, then turn back just before the glory part. It's like training for a marathon, running 25 miles, then stopping right before the finish line so someone else can cross it. Some men cry, some accept it stoically. Tom Crean reportedly weeps openly when he's sent back just 150 miles from the pole, so close to the goal it physically hurts to turn away. But turning back saves their lives. The men who go farther south die there. Distance from the pole is inversely proportional to survival. The closer you get to 90 degrees south, the closer you get to death. Crean doesn't know this yet. He just knows he's being sent home, and it feels like failure. Back at Cape Evans, you track their progress on maps, pushing pins farther south with each status update. The hut feels haunted by absence. Conversations trailing off mid-sentence when someone mentions the pole party. You do your work, weather readings, seal hunting, equipment maintenance, but it's all just killing time, waiting for news that won't come for months. At night, you stare south into darkness and wonder if they've reached the pole yet. Wonder if they've won the race. Wonder if they're coming back. The answer is approaching fast, and it's worse than anyone imagines. January 4th, 1912, at 87 D32. South, just a 50 miles from the pole, Scott makes his final selection. 12 men have hauled supply this far, but only 5 will continue to the pole itself. This is the moment that defines everything: who lives, who dies, who gets remembered, and who gets blamed. Scott stands in the tent, wind battering the canvas, and announces his choice. Himself, Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, Lawrence Oates, and Edgar Evans. The other 7, including Tom Crean, William Lashley, and Lieutenant Edward Evans, are ordered to turn back. Feel the crushing disappointment in that tent, thick as the cold. Crean weeps openly, so close to the goal that turning back feels like amputation. But orders are orders, and the British follow orders even when those orders are death sentences. Here's what makes this selection controversial, debated by historians for over a century. Scott originally planned a 4-man polar party. All the rations, tent space and equipment were calculated for 4. At the last second, he adds Bowers as a 5th, throwing off all calculations. Now 5 men have to share 4 men's worth of food, sleep in a tent designed for 4, and burn calories Scott never budgeted for. It's like inviting an extra person to dinner after you've already portioned the food. Everyone eats less, and someone's going hungry. Imagine planning a road trip for 4 people, then adding a 5th person at the last gas station before the desert. Now you have 4 seats, 4 sleeping bags, and fuel calculated for 4 people's worth of weight. That 5th person isn't just along for the ride. They're a walking resource drain that could kill everyone. Why did Scott do this? Theories abound. Maybe he wanted insurance, more hands for emergencies. Maybe he couldn't decide who to exclude. Maybe he thought 5 men looked more impressive for the photographs, Whatever the reason, it's a decision that contributes directly to all 5 men dying. Bowers himself isn't the problem. He's tough, reliable, built like a firecracker of competence. But the math doesn't lie. 5 men eating 4 men's rations equals slow starvation. Edgar Evans is already deteriorating. He suffered a hand injury earlier, which has partially healed but left him weakened. His fingers are frostbitten, his movement's slower than before. Listen to what Apsley Cherry Garrard wrote later. Evans was the strongest man physically, but also the biggest. He needed more calories than anyone, and he was getting the least relative to his size. He was starving faster than the others. The selection also affects who survives. The men sent back, Crean, Lashley and Evans, will face their own near-death experience on the return. Lieutenant Evans will collapse with scurvy, unable to walk semi-conscious. Crean will leave Lashley to care for him and walk 35 miles alone across the ice shelf in 18 hours to fetch help from Cape Evans, saving Evans' life in one of the most underappreciated acts of heroism in polar history. But they survive because they turned back early, before the deep starvation and frostbite set in. The final 5 push forward. Feel the weight of finality in every step now. No more support parties, no more turning back, just 5 men and the pole, and whatever waits beyond it. The sledge is lighter without support party supplies, but so are the men. They're averaging less than 4,000 calories a day while burning 6,000, 7,000. The deficit is built in, compounding daily, an invisible countdown to collapse. The weather is pristine. Cold, clear, perfect for travel. Temperatures hold steady around -20, which is basically tropical by Antarctic standards. The surface is good, wind minimal. They're making decent progress, covering 10 to 12 miles per day. Morale is high because they genuinely believe they're going to win. Nobody has seen evidence of Amundsen yet. No tracks, no markers, nothing to suggest the Norwegians are ahead. They don't know Amundsen is already there. He reached the pole on December the 14th, planted his flag, left supplies and a letter, and started heading home. By the time Scott's party is trudging towards a victory, Amundsen is already back at his base camp, warm and well-fed, writing telegrams to announce his triumph to the world. Imagine the psychology. You're suffering, starving, freezing, hauling a sledge by hand for weeks, convinced you're making history. You've bet your life, your reputation and your men's lives on being first. And you're already second, but you don't know it yet. The race is over and you lost, but you keep running because ignorance is the only thing keeping you from total despair. January 16th at 12. So Scott writes in his diary, "The worst has happened. We have been forestalled by the Norwegians. They found Amundsen's tracks, ski marks cutting across virgin snow like scars across hope. The realization settles on them like a physical weight. They're not going to be first. All the suffering, the planning, the sacrifice, the ponies shot and motors abandoned, and calories burned, it was all for second place." Listen to what that must have sounded like. The silence in the tent that night. 5 men sitting with the knowledge that they've lost. No one speaks. What is there to say? They've walked 800 miles to be the runner-up, and they still have to walk miles back with inadequate food and failing bodies and the crushing weight of failure. January 7th, 1912. They reach the South Pole and find Amundsen's tent waiting for them like a grave marker. A Norwegian flag snapping in the wind. A letter addressed to King Haakon of Norway, which Amundsen politely asks Scott to deliver in case the Norwegian party doesn't make it home. The audacity is stunning. "Hey, we beat you, and can you mail this for us?" It's the geographical equivalent of adding insult to injury, except the injury is your entire life's ambition crumbling into Antarctic dust. Scott's diary entry is heartbreaking in its restraint. Great God, this is an awful place and terrible enough for us to have laboured to it without the reward of priority. They take photographs, 5 men standing at the pole, faces grim, eyes hollow, looking less like conquerors and more like pallbearers at their own funeral. These photos will become iconic, images of defeat masquerading as achievement. They turn north and begin the return journey. 800 miles of ice, inadequate food, failing bodies, and winter approaching fast, bringing temperatures that will drop to -50, -60, -70. The race is over. The dying has begun, But you won't know any of this for months. Back at Cape Evans, you're still waiting, still hopeful, still pushing pins on maps and imagining triumph. You don't know that 5 men are already ghosts, walking north on frozen legs, eating inadequate rations, counting down to their last breaths. You won't know until October, when the search party finds them, 3 bodies in a tent, frozen in their sleeping bags, diary entries trailing off into eternity. Wilson and Bowers on either side of Scott, who died last. His arm stretched across Wilson like he was reaching for warmth that never came. But that's chapter 5. Right now, we're still in the moment before knowledge, the pause before grief. You stand outside Cape Evans, staring south into sunlight that's starting to dim as autumn approaches. Somewhere out there, 5 men are walking home, or trying to, and Antarctica is waiting. January 19th, 1912. You're standing at the South Pole, except you're not. You're Edgar Evans, or Wilson, or Bowers, or Oates, or Scott, and you're staring at a Norwegian flag that shouldn't be here. The wind snaps the fabric with sharp cracks that sound like breaking bones. Listen to it. Snap, crack, snap. A rhythm of defeat that will haunt your dreams if you survive long enough to have dreams again. The temperature is -22 Fahrenheit, which is relatively warm for Antarctica, and that should be comforting, except nothing is comforting anymore. You've just walked 862 miles to come in second place, and now you have to walk 862 miles back with inadequate food, failing equipment, and the crushing psychological weight of being the runner-up in a race that cost everything. Feel the harness cutting into your shoulders as you turn the sledge north. The leather is frozen stiff, biting through layers of wool and canvas like teeth. Your hands are numb inside mittens that used to be warm, but now feel like they are made of cardboard soaked in ice water. Smell the sharp cold. It has a scent, metallic and clean, like breathing inside a freezer made of knife blades. Scott writes in his diary, "I am afraid the return journey is going to be dreadfully tiring and monotonous." This is British understatement at its finest, like calling the Titanic a bit damp or describing a shark attack as mildly inconvenient. The return journey won't be tiring and monotonous. It will be a slow-motion nightmare where you watch yourself die by degrees and can't do anything to stop it. Here's your horrifying math lesson. You're burning approximately 1,600 calories per day, hauling sledges in extreme cold. Your daily ration provides 4,500 calories. That's a 2,000 calorie deficit every single day, which means you're eating yourself, burning muscle and fat to make up the difference. You have 862 miles to cover, which at 12 miles per day means 72 days of travel. That's 144,000 calories you need, but won't get. Your body is a bank account that's overdrawn, and Antarctica is the collection agency. Imagine running a marathon every day for 2.5 months, while eating only 2/3 of what you need. Now add temperatures that freeze your sweat to your skin, winds that knock you down, and the knowledge that there's no finish line, no medal, no glory. Just maybe making it home alive if you're lucky and the weather doesn't kill you first. The first days aren't terrible, not by Antarctic standards anyway. The weather holds steady, the surface is reasonable, and you make decent progress. 10 miles, 11 miles, 12 miles per day. The polar plateau stretches endlessly in every direction, white and flat and featureless as boredom, made solid. There are no landmarks, no variation, just pulling and stepping and breathing and trying not to think about how far you still have to go. Edgar Evans is already struggling. He injured his hand weeks ago when he fell, and it's not healing properly. Watch him fumble with the harness straps, his fingers clumsy and slow. He's the biggest man in the party, which means he needs the most calories, but everyone's getting the same rations. He's starving faster than the others, his body cannibalizing itself to keep moving. At night, you crawl into the tent and fire up the Primus stove. Listen to it roar, a tiny dragon of heat in an infinite cold. The hoosh bubbles in the pot, pemmican and water and desperation, creating a greasy stew that tastes like survival distilled into liquid form. Taste it coating your tongue, heavy with fat, inadequate but essential. The biscuits require 10 minutes of sucking before they're soft enough to chew. Your jaw aches from the effort. Scott rations everything carefully. Fuel, food, hope. Each depot you pass has less than expected. The fuel cans are mysteriously short. leather washers having shrunk in the cold and allowed precious kerosene to evaporate. This will become critical later, but right now it's just an inconvenience, a puzzle. Why is there less fuel than we cached? Nobody has answers, just growing unease. You're literally dying of starvation while surrounded by frozen pony meat you cached on the way south. But eating the pony meat means stopping longer, burning more fuel you don't have, taking time you can't spare. So you starve next to food you can't afford to eat. It's like dying of thirst while drowning. Technically possible, absolutely absurd, completely Antarctic. The nights are the worst. You lie in your sleeping. Back here, reindeer fur, frozen solid with your own sweat, requiring 30 minutes of body heat just to soften enough to crawl inside. Feel the ice against your skin, melting slowly into dampness that soaks through your underlayers. The cold finds every gap in your clothing, every weakness in your defences. Your feet throb with the beginning of frostbite, a dull ache that never quite becomes numbness, staying just painful enough to prevent sleep. Listen to the wind outside the tent, a constant howl that sounds like Antarctica laughing at your presumption. The tent fabric snaps and cracks, stressed by gusts that threaten to tear it away and leave you exposed. Inside, 5 men breathe heavily, condensation freezing on the tent walls and falling as ice crystals that coat everything in fine powder. You brush it off your sleeping bag, your face, your hands. It comes back. It always comes back. By February 17 you've descended the polar plateau and reached the top of the Beardmore Glacier. 125 miles of crevassed ice dropping 10,000 feet to the Ross Ice Shelf. Going up was hard. Going down is worse. The sledge wants to run away from you on the downslopes, pulling against your grip, threatening to drag you into crevasses hidden under snow bridges. Feel your muscles strain holding it back, shoulders screaming, legs trembling with the effort of the controlled descent. Evans is deteriorating rapidly now. His movements are sluggish, his speech slurred. On January 23rd, Scott noted in his diary that Evans seemed dull and incapable. That's the first crack in the foundation. By February 4th, after another fall on the glacier, Evans is barely functional, hands so frostbitten he can't grip properly, mind foggy with hypothermia and starvation, body shutting down system by system. You watch it happen in slow motion. Watch him fumble with his harness, fingers like frozen sausages, unable to fasten the buckles. Watch him stumble over the flat ice, his balance gone. Watch his eyes, confused, distant, like he's looking at you from very far away. This is what dying looks like when it takes its time, when it savours every moment, when it wants you to see exactly what it's doing. February 17th, 1912. Near the base of the Beardmore Glacier, Evans collapses. He falls behind during the march, and when the others go back to check, they find him on his knees in the snow, hands bare and frozen, trying to refasten his skis with fingers that won't obey. His face is blank, eyes unfocused. He's hypothermic, possibly concussed from earlier falls, definitely dying. They drag him back to camp, literally drag him, because he can't walk anymore. Feel the dead weight of a dying man, heavier than any sledge, pulling against your grip as you haul him across ice. Smell the sharp scent of fear sweat even through the cold. Hear his breathing, ragged and wet, each breath sounding like it might be the last. He dies that night in the tent, quietly, without drama, just breath. Stopping between one moment and the next. Listen to the silence where his breathing used to be, a gap in the sound that fills the tent like water rising. 4 men remain, 800 miles to go, and winter is coming fast. You leave Evans in the tent. No time for burial, no energy for ceremony. Just cover him with snow, stack rocks if you can find them, and walk away. Feel the guilt settling on your shoulders like physical weight. You're leaving him behind, abandoning him to the ice, and it feels like failure even though keeping him means everyone dies. That night, lying in your sleeping bag, you count the remaining party. 4, down from 5, simple math that feels like prophecy. How many will make it home? The question hangs in the frozen air, and nobody speaks it loud because speaking makes it real. You drift towards his sleep listening to the wind, and Evan's absence feels like foreshadowing. March 6th, 1912. You're somewhere on the Ross Ice Shelf, approximately 470 miles from Cape Evans, and Lawrence Titus Oates is dying. His feet are black with frostbite, gangrene spreading through toes that haven't had feeling in weeks. Each step is agony. You see it in his face, the way his jaw clenches, the way sweat freezes on his forehead, even in temperatures that should make sweating impossible. The temperature has dropped to minus 40 Fahrenheit, which is Antarctic for actively trying to kill you. Listen to your breath freezing in your beard, tiny crackling sounds as a moisture turns to ice, clicking against your jacket collar like frozen wind chimes. Feel the cold pressing through every layer of clothing, finding skin, stealing heat, counting down to your last warm moment. Oates knows he's slowing the party down. Every step takes him twice as long as the others, his feet barely lifting, dragging through snow that might as well be concrete. Watch him fall behind by 10 yards, 20, 30. Watch the others wait. Precious minutes ticking away while he stumbles forward. Time is fuel. Time is food. Time is the difference between reaching the depot and dying short. Imagine running a race where every minute you're late, someone you love suffers. Now imagine your legs don't work properly. Each step is knives through your feet, and you know, absolutely know, that you're killing your friends by being slow. That's Oates' reality. That's his nightmare. That's why what he does next becomes legend. The food situation is desperate. You're on quarter rations now, barely 2,000 calories per day while burning 3 times that. Your body is consuming itself. Muscle breaking down for energy, fat reserves long gone, organs starting to fail. Taste the ketones on your breath, sharp and chemical, the smell of starvation. Your gums bleed, your vision blurs, your mind drifts during marches, losing time, coming back to awareness miles later with no memory of walking them. Fuel is worse. The depots keep coming up short. Cans that should have a gallon have half that, evaporated through faulty seals. This means less time running the stove, which means less water from melted snow, which means dehydration, adding to starvation, adding to frostbite, adding to exhaustion. It's a cascade of failures, each one multiplying the others, creating a death spiral you can't escape. March 15th, 1912. Morning. The temperature is minus 40. The blizzard that's been pinning you in the tent for 2 days shows no sign of stopping. Listen to the wind scream across the ice, a banshee wail that penetrates tent fabric and sleeping bags and hope itself. Inside, 4 men lie in their sleeping bags, conserving energy they don't have, waiting for weather that won't improve. Oates' feet are ruined, black up to the ankles, tissue dead, gangrene spreading. He knows what comes next, amputation, assuming they had the tools and the time and the survival margin for surgery, which they don't. He knows he's dead. The only question is whether he takes the others with him. He makes his decision. Feel what that must be like. Choosing death, not in a moment of panic or passion, but coldly, rationally, knowing exactly what you're doing. Calculating that your death buys your friends maybe 2 days of food, maybe a faster march, maybe the difference between them making it and everyone dying together in this tent. He says something to the others. The exact words are lost. Scott doesn't record them in his diary, probably couldn't bear to, but the legend says, "I am just going outside and maybe some time." Listen to those words. Hear the British understatement, the stiff upper lip courage, the matter-of-fact delivery that makes suicide sound like a stroll to the corner shop. He stands. Feel the effort that takes. Muscles wasted, feet ruined, body barely functional. He pushes aside the tent flap. Outside is minus 40, wind gusting to 50 miles per hour, snow horizontal and blinding. Stepping out in this is stepping into death, and everyone knows it. Nobody stops him. What would they say? Don't go? That means everyone dies slower. Stay. That means watching him suffer for days while food runs out. He walks into the blizzard. Listen to his footsteps, crunch, drag, fading into wind. He doesn't scream, doesn't cry out, just walks until the cold takes him, which at minus 40 probably takes 15 minutes, maybe 20. Hypothermia shuts down the brain, induces confusion and sleepiness, makes dying feel like falling asleep. It's not a kind death, but it's faster than gangrene. The 3 remaining men, Scott, Wilson, Bowers, lie in their sleeping bags and listen to silence where Oates used to be. Nobody speaks. What is there to say? They've just witnessed a man walk to his death so they might live. Except they won't live. Spoiler alert. Oates' sacrifice buys them nothing. They'll all be dead within weeks, frozen in a tent just 11 miles from the depot that could have saved them. Oates' last words become one of the most famous quotes in exploration history. "I'm just going outside and maybe some time gets carved into memorials, quoted in books, taught in schools as an example of British courage. He becomes a legend, a hero, the man who walked into a blizzard for his friends. And he's still dead, frozen somewhere on the Ross Ice Shelf, body never recovered, sacrifice meaningless except as inspiration for people who weren't there." Historians debate whether Oates actually said those exact words, or if Scott wrote them later to make the moment sound better. Some argue Oates was delirious, didn't make a conscious choice, just wandered out in hypothermic confusion. Others insist he was lucid to the end, making the most selfless decision in exploration history. The truth is buried under a century of ice, unknowable. But this much is certain. Oates left that tent on March the 16th, 1912, his 32nd birthday, and never came back. His body has never been found. Somewhere on the Ross Ice Shelf, under decades of accumulated snow, his frozen remains wait. Maybe the ice has crushed him to nothing. Maybe he's perfectly preserved, frozen mid-step, walking forever toward nowhere. The 3 remaining men strike camp when the weather clears. They pack Oates' sleeping bag, his spare clothes, his personal effects. Everything gets loaded on the sledge because you don't abandon equipment, even when you're abandoning people. British priorities remain intact even when British lives don't. They march north. 11 miles per day becomes 8, then 6, then 4. Feel the exhaustion in every muscle, the way lifting a foot requires conscious effort, the way your vision narrows to tunnel focus on the person ahead. Your body is shutting down non-essential functions, digestion stops, immune system fails, extremities lose circulation to keep the core warm. You're dying in installments, paying for survival one body part at a time. March 19th, 1912, they reach a point approximately 11 miles from One Ton Depot, the cache of food and fuel that would save them. 11 miles. 2 days of walking if they were healthy. Might as well be 11,000. A blizzard hits, pinning them in the tent. They wait for it to clear. It doesn't. Days pass, food runs out, fuel runs out, hope runs out. Listen to the wind outside, a constant roar that never stops, never pauses, never gives them a chance to make those final 11 miles. Inside the tent, 3 men lie in sleeping bags, too weak to move, too starved to generate body heat, slowly freezing in their sleep. Scott writes his last diary entries. His handwriting gets shakier with each day, words trailing off mid-sentence as his fingers freeze. He writes letters to wives, mothers, the public. He writes about the journey, the mistakes, the bad luck. He never quite admits the truth, that this wasn't bad luck, it was bad planning, bad decisions, bad leadership compounded by British arrogance, and a refusal to learn from people who knew better. March 29, 1912, the last diary entry. Seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. Feel what that means, giving up not just on survival, but on documenting survival, on leaving a record, on being remembered. The pen stops, the words end, and 3 men die in a tent 11 miles from salvation they'll never reach. November 12th, 1912. 8 months after Scott's last diary entry, a search party from Cape Evans heads south. You're with them. You've spent the Antarctic winter at base camp wondering, hoping, lying to yourself about what you'll find. The spring sun returns, weak and watery, casting long shadows across the ice. Time to find out if anyone's coming back. You're part of an 11-man team led by Surgeon Edward Atkinson, trudging across the Ross Ice Shelf with sledges loaded with supplies you pray you won't need. Shovels for digging, canvas for burials, equipment for recovery. The air is crisp at -20 Fahrenheit, relatively warm for Antarctica, which makes it worse somehow. If the weather had been this mild in March, maybe they'd still be alive. Listen to the crunch of boots on hard-packed snow, a steady rhythm that sounds like a funeral march, because that's exactly what this is. The landscape is endless white in every direction, featureless except for the occasional sastrugi, wind-carved ice ridges that look like frozen waves. Your eyes scan the horizon constantly, searching for something, anything, a flag, a cairn, a body. It's like searching for a specific grain of sand on a beach the size of a continent, except the sand is white and frozen and might contain your friends' corpses. Days pass in grinding repetition. Wake frozen, eat barely enough, march south, scan for signs, make camp, sleep inadequately, repeat. The uncertainty is its own torture. Not knowing is worse than knowing because your mind fills the gaps with every possible horror. Maybe they made it farther south than you think. Maybe they're at a depot, waiting. Maybe they're alive somehow, against all logic and physics and Antarctic reality. November 12th. You're approximately 150 miles south of Cape Evans when someone shouts. Feel your heart stop, then race. There, in the distance, a mound that's too regular to be natural, a snow cairn, or maybe just a drift shaped by wind. You don't run. You can't run in this cold with this equipment, but you move faster, urgency overriding exhaustion. As you get closer, details emerge. It's definitely man-made. A tent collapsed under snow, nearly buried by 8 months of accumulation. The bamboo pole marking it barely visible, a tiny flag hanging limp in still air. Dull. Listen to your breathing, ragged and loud inside your balaclava. Steam clouds freezing instantly. Smell nothing. The cold has locked even scent molecules into submission. But taste the copper tang of adrenaline and fear on your tongue. The team stops 50 feet away. Nobody wants to be first. Nobody wants to see what's inside. Atkinson approaches slowly, drops to his knees, starts brushing away snow with mittened hands. Feel the texture of it. Powder on top, crusted underneath, resistant to digging. Takes 30 minutes to uncover the tent entrance. He opens the flap. The silence that follows is absolute, heavy as grief, thick as ice, then quiet as prayer. I've found them. You approach, look inside and see 3 sleeping bags, still zipped, arranged neatly side by side. Inside them are bodies, frozen solid, preserved by cold, looking almost peaceful except for the blackened frostbite on their faces, the hollowed cheeks of starvation, the absolute stillness of death. Scott is in the middle, his sleeping bag open at the top, one arm stretched across Wilson as if seeking warmth or comfort in his final moments. Wilson and Bowers flank him, their faces turned away, frozen in positions they'll hold forever, RMG. The tent is remarkably organised for a death scene. Personal effects stacked neatly, geological samples carefully preserved. They carried 35 pounds of rocks to the very end, prioritising science over survival because that's what British explorers do. Scott's diary sits beside him, his final entry dated March 29th. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. Letters to wives, mothers, the public, all carefully sealed and labelled. He knew he was dying, so he spent his last energy documenting it properly. Even at the end, dying of starvation 11 miles from salvation, Scott maintained proper paperwork. Very British, very Scott, very tragically, uselessly noble. Here's your historical gut punch. They're 11 miles from 1 ton depot. 11 miles! 2 days of healthy walking, they had 9 days of food, but the blizzard pinned them for 9 days straight, and by the time it cleared, they were too weak to move. They could see their salvation on the horizon through binoculars, the black flag marking the depot visible on clear days, but couldn't reach it. That's not tragedy. That's cosmic cruelty, RMG. The search party doesn't remove the bodies. What would be the point? Antarctica has become their tomb, and it's as good a resting place as any. Instead, you collapse the tent over them, working carefully, reverently folding canvas around frozen forms. Then comes the cairn building. Stones and ice blocks stacked high, creating a monument that will last centuries, marking the spot where ambition died of exposure. Someone finds Scott's final journal entries. You gather around as Atkinson reads aloud, his voice cracking. Had we lived, I should have had a tale to tell of the hardihood, endurance, and courage of my companions, which would have stirred the heart of every Englishman. These rough notes and our dead bodies must tell the tale. Listen to the wind pick up, a low moan across the ice that sounds like Antarctica commenting on human presumption. Feel tears freeze on your cheeks. You didn't realise you were crying until the moisture turns to ice, stinging your skin. Taste salt and sorrow and the sharp bite of cold air in lungs that keep working while theirs don't. You search south for oats, but find nothing. He walked into a blizzard and disappeared into Antarctica's vastness. His body never recovered, his exact resting place unknown. Maybe the ice crushed him. Maybe he's preserved somewhere under decades of snow, frozen mid-step, walking forever toward nowhere. It feels appropriate somehow, Oates choosing his own end, his own grave, answering to no one. The search party places a cross atop the cairn carved with names and dates. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. It's from Tennyson's Ulysses, and it's meant to sound heroic. Mostly it sounds sad. 5 men who strove and sought and found nothing but death, yielding everything to ice and pride and poor planning. You turn north and begin the journey back to Cape Evans. Nobody speaks. What is there to say? You found them, which means confirming what you already knew. They're not coming home. The expedition is over. The race is lost. And somewhere in Norway, Amundsen is probably having dinner, alive and warm and first, while you're trudging across ice past frozen friends who died for second place. That night, camping on the barrier, you lie in your sleeping bag and think about Scott's last words, about tales of hardihood that will stir English hearts. You think about how he got everything wrong. The motors, the ponies, the man-hauling, the food calculations, the race itself. But somehow through dying he'll become a hero. Failure transformed into nobility through sacrifice. Second place elevated to martyrdom through death. Modern parallel. It's like losing a game but getting a participation trophy made of your own frozen corpse. Everyone will remember you lost, but they'll respect how you lost. With dignity, with journal walls, with geological samples you refuse to abandon, even as they helped kill you. You drift towards sleep, listening to wind and your own heartbeat, thinking about 11 miles. 11 miles between life and death. 11 miles they couldn't cross. 11 miles that will define them forever. Not the 862 they walked successfully, but the final 11 they didn't. And somewhere under snow and ice and time, 3 men sleep in their bags, frozen in the moment between fighting and surrender. Preserved forever at the instant when Antarctica finally won. February 10th, 1913. You're in London, standing outside a newspaper office on Fleet Street, watching vendors post headlines that will define an era. Captain Scott and companions perish in Antarctic. Feel the cold February drizzle on your face. Warmer than any Antarctic blizzard, but somehow more chilling because now the dying has names, faces, stories. The crowd around you is silent, reading and rereading words that shouldn't be real. The Terra arrived in New Zealand 3 days ago, carrying the search party and the truth. The telegram went out immediately. Scott reached the pole on January 17th, 1912, found Amundsen had beaten him by 34 days, and died with Wilson and Bowers 11 miles from salvation. Oates walked into a blizzard to save his companions. Spoiler, it didn't work. Evans died on the Beardmore Glacier, his brain and body broken by falls and frostbite and inadequate food. Listen to the newsboy shouting headlines, his voice cracking with something between grief and commercial opportunity. Scott dies hero! British courage defeats Antarctic. Read all about it, 2p a copy. The papers sell out within hours, reprinted by afternoon, sold out again. Everyone wants to read about noble failure, about men who died trying, about how losing can somehow be winning if you die elegantly enough. It's like a sports team losing the championship but getting more media coverage than the winners because they lost with style. Except instead of losing a trophy, they lost their lives. And instead of a post-game interview, they left frozen corpses and heartbreaking diary entries. You buy a paper and read Scott's final message to the public, written while he was dying in that tent, knowing these would be his last words to the world. We took risks. We knew we took them. Things have come out against us, and therefore we have no cause for complaint, but bow to the will of Providence. Feel the weight of those words. A man dying of his own poor decisions, blaming bad luck and God instead of admitting maybe, just maybe, bringing ponies to Antarctica and refusing to use dogs properly was the real problem. But the British public doesn't care about logistics. They care about heroism, about men facing death with stiff upper lips and proper grammar. Scott's message continues. Had we lived, I should have had a tale to tell of the hardihood, endurance and courage of my companions, which would have stirred the heart of every Englishman. And stir it does. Within days, Scott becomes a national hero, his failure transformed into triumph through the alchemy of noble death. The details emerge slowly, each one more heartbreaking than the last. They were 11 miles from One Ton Depot. 11 miles. The dogs that could have saved them, that Scott ordered to meet him, never came because of confusion, scurvy, miscommunication, and British bureaucratic incompetence even at the end of the world. Cherry Garrard made it only to One Ton Depot, couldn't navigate farther south without instructions, waited, then turned back. He was there, so close while Scott's party froze to death within reach. That knowledge will haunt Cherry Garrard for the rest of his life. The rescue party that could have saved them didn't because the lead doctor decided unloading ship supplies was more important than meeting Scott's explicit orders. Then when they finally sent help, they sent a man who was nearly blind without his glasses and couldn't navigate. It's organisational incompetence masquerading as mere tragedy, failure piled on. Failure until everyone's dead. Here's your historical controversy that still rages today. Could Scott have been saved? Scholars argue endlessly. Some say the weather was unprecedented, that no one could have predicted temperatures dropping to -47 at night on the Barrier in March. Others point out Amundsen encountered similar temperatures and thrived because he had proper equipment, enough food, and dogs that worked. The debate boils down to this: was it bad luck or bad leadership? You stand in the London rain reading about men who died in unimaginable cold, and you realise something uncomfortable. Scott's writing his own legend from inside a frozen tent. He's controlling the narrative, positioning himself as a victim of circumstance rather than architect of disaster. And it's working. The public is eating it up. The memorial services begin within days. St. Paul's Cathedral fills with mourners. The King sends condolences. Parliament rises in tribute. Oates becomes particularly romanticised. A very gallant gentleman, Scott wrote, describing his final walk. That phrase will be carved on memorials, taught in schools, repeated until it becomes more real than the actual moment when a desperate, gangrenous man walked into a blizzard because his captain's poor planning left no other option. Taste the metallic tang of public grief mixed with national pride. Britain in Hut 13 is an empire starting to crack. Social unrest, suffragette movements, labour strikes, the approaching sadhuis of World War I. Scott's heroic failure provides a narrative the nation desperately needs. Proof that British courage and determination matter more than victory, that dying nobly is better than living as second best. Amundsen, meanwhile, is alive and well in Norway, having won the race decisively. But his triumph is overshadowed by Scott's martyrdom. Feel the unfairness of it. Amundsen planned better, executed flawlessly, and got home safely with all his men. His reward? Being remembered as the guy who beat the heroic British losers. History loves a tragic hero more than a competent winner. The newspapers published Scott's last letters, to his wife Kathleen, to his friend J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, to the mothers of Wilson and Bowers. They're heartbreaking and manipulative, beautiful and calculated. What lots and lots I could tell you of this journey, he writes to Kathleen. How much better has it been than lounging in too great comfort at home? He's literally dying of comfort deficiency, telling his wife that suffering was better than being warm. Very British, very Scott, very designed to make her grief feel like noble sacrifice rather than preventable tragedy. You fold the newspaper, rain soaking through the paper, ink running like tears. Around you, London continues. Vendors shouting, carriages clattering, life going on, but something has shifted. 5 men died on ice most people will never see for a goal that means nothing practical, in service of pride disguised as exploration. And somehow through dying they've become immortal. Their failure more memorable than most successes, their deaths more inspiring than many lives. Listen to the church bells tolling across London, a sound that carries across the rain and the years, marking the moment when disaster became legend. That night you lie in your warm bed, blanket soft, room heated, belly full, and think about men freezing 11 miles from salvation. You think about how thin the line is between hero and fool, how success and failure can flip based on who tells the story and how long after everyone's dead. You drift towards sleep listening to rain on windows instead of the wind on tent fabric, grateful for survival you didn't earn, mourning deaths you couldn't prevent, and wondering what the truth really is when tragedy becomes mythology. March 1913. You're sitting in a London theatre watching a memorial film. Herbert Ponting's footage from the expedition, edited into something called Scott's Last Journey. Watch flickering images of ponies in snow, men hauling sledges, the Terra Nova trapped in ice. The audience sits in reverent silence, handkerchiefs dabbing eyes, while an orchestra plays sombre music over scenes of men who are now dead. Feel the strange disconnect of watching ghosts move on screen. Evans smiling at the camera, Oates coaxing a pony, Scott writing in his diary. They're alive in the footage, frozen in time before they froze into ice. The theatre is packed, standing room only, everyone wanting to see the expedition that became a tragedy, wanting to feel connected to heroism they'll never personally face. The Memorial Fund launches immediately. Within weeks, it raises over 75,000 men, nearly double what the original expedition cost. Listen to the sound of coins dropping in collection boxes outside every theatre, church and public building. The money is supposed to support the widows and families of the dead men, pay off expedition debts, and fund a memorial. It's like a GoFundMe campaign, except it's 1913, there's no internet, and people are literally throwing money at dead explorers' families because dying in Antarctica somehow erases the fact that poor planning killed them. The public relations value of noble death is measured in pounds sterling and public admiration. Kathleen Scott, the captain's widow, becomes a public figure. Beautiful, artistic, tragic. She gives speeches, attends memorials, raises their son Peter, who will grow up to be a famous naturalist and artist. Watch her navigate grief while performing it for a nation that demands she embody stoic British strength. She never remarries Scott. Couldn't really, when his ghost is busy being canonised into national mythology. The same British public that's now worshipping Scott also underfunded his expedition in the first place. If they'd thrown this much money at him while he was alive instead of dead, maybe he could have afforded enough food and fuel to survive. But dead heroes are cheaper than successful explorers. They don't need ongoing funding, just monuments and memories. The memorials go up everywhere. In London, statues, plaques, stained glass windows. In New Zealand, cairns and crosses. At Cape Evans, the cross with Tennyson's quote still stands, marking where the search party turned from looking for the living to burying the dead. Each memorial transforms failure into nobility, logistics problems into acts of God, preventable deaths into unavoidable tragedy. Here's your scholarly debate that rages for decades. Was Scott a hero or a bumbler? The hagiography begins immediately. Books published celebrating his courage, articles praising his sacrifice, schools naming themselves after him. For 60 years, questioning Scott is like questioning Churchill or Shakespeare. You simply don't, not in polite British society. But then the revisionism starts. In the 1960s and 70s, historians begin asking uncomfortable questions. Why did Scott take 5 men when he planned for 4? Why did he reject dogs in favour of man-hauling? Why were the depots undersupplied? Why didn't he learn from Amundsen's methods? The answers make Scott look less like a hero and more like a man who prioritised appearance over survival, tradition over efficiency, pride over practicality. Roland Huntford's 1979 book Scott and Amundsen particularly savages Scott's reputation, portraying him as an incompetent leader whose decisions killed his men. The book causes outrage in Britain. How dare anyone question our national hero? But it also sparks necessary debate. Can you be both brave and wrong? Can good intentions excuse fatal mistakes? You stand in front of a memorial statue in Aberdeen, reading the inscription, "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." Feel the weight of those words. They sound heroic until you remember that yielding, turning back, admitting defeat, choosing survival over glory would have kept 5 men alive. Sometimes yielding is wisdom, not weakness. The scientific legacy gets complicated too. Yes, Scott's party collected 35 pounds of geological specimens, including plant fossils that helped prove Antarctica was once warm and supported continental drift theory. That's genuinely valuable science. But was it worth dying for? Could the same specimens have been collected on a better planned expedition that didn't kill everyone? The rocks are in museums now, labelled with the names of dead men who carried them when they should have been carrying extra food. Taste the bitterness of legacy mixed with loss. Wilson was a talented scientist and artist. His penguin studies and sketches advanced ornithology significantly. But he's dead at 39, his potential unrealised. Bowers was efficient, capable, exactly the kind of man you'd want on any expedition. Dead at 28. Oates was a cavalry officer who loved horses and died knowing he led them to slaughter before walking into his own death. Dead at 32. Evans was strong, capable, killed by his size requiring more calories than Scott budgeted. Dead at 35. Scott was 43, experienced enough to know better, dead from decisions he made and refused to unmake. Listen to the memorial service music, soaring and tragic, transforming death into destiny. The choir sings hymns about sacrifice and duty, about giving your life for something greater. But what was greater here? National pride, geographic trivia, being first to an arbitrary point on a frozen continent? The uncomfortable truth is they died for very little of lasting value beyond their own mythology. You leave the theatre as credits roll, walking into London evening, passing newspaper boys still shouting about Scott's heroic end. Around you, life continues. People buying fish and chips, couples arguing, children playing. The Empire keeps grinding forward, soon to throw millions more young men into the trenches of World War I, where dying for questionable goals will become industrial-scale policy. That night you write in your diary something Scott would appreciate. Him being an obsessive diarist who documented his own death with literary precision. You write about the disconnect between the heroic narrative and the preventable tragedy, between what the public wants to believe and what actually happened on the ice. The myth is already set, though. Scott the hero, noble in failure, British to the end. The myth will outlive everyone who knows the truth, will be taught to school children for generations, will define how we think about exploration and courage and the costs of ambition. And somewhere under Antarctic ice, 3 men sleep in their frozen tent, unaware they've become legends, unknowing of the debates they'll inspire, resting in the moment when they were still human and failing rather than symbols of something grander and less true. Present day. You're reading this script more than a century after Scott died, and you have the luxury of perspective, something the Edwardian British public didn't have. You can see the whole story now, the mistakes, the hubris, the humanity behind the hero worship. So what do we actually learn from the Terra Nova disaster? First lesson: good intentions don't prevent bad outcomes. Scott genuinely wanted to do science, advance knowledge, bring glory to Britain. His diary entries show real affection for his companions, real grief when they suffered. He wasn't a monster, he was just wrong. Wrong about transportation, wrong about food requirements, wrong about the value of suffering for its own sake. Being well-intentioned while being fatally wrong is possibly worse than being malicious, because it kills people who trust you. Modern parallel is like a boss who genuinely cares about their team, but makes terrible decisions that tank the company. The caring doesn't save jobs, the good intentions don't pay mortgages, and in Antarctica, warmth of feeling doesn't compensate for cold reality. Second lesson: learn from people who know better, even if they're not from your culture. Amundsen studied Inuit survival techniques, clothing, sledges, dog handling, food preparation. He learned from people who'd been surviving Arctic conditions for millennia. Scott relied on British naval tradition and the assumption that British methods were automatically superior. One approach kept everyone alive, the other created 5 frozen corpses. Pride costs lives. Listen to what this means. The Norwegians ate dog meat, wore fur instead of wool, used skis efficiently. Scott considered these methods unsportsmanlike, as if survival were a game with rules about fair play. The ice doesn't care about sportsmanship. It cares about heat loss and calorie deficits and whether your clothing actually works. Third lesson: systems matter more than heroism. Scott's expedition ran on individual heroism, men pulling sledges through willpower, Oates walking into a blizzard in noble sacrifice, everyone suffering stoically until they died. Amundsen's expedition ran on good systems, efficient dogs, adequate food, realistic planning, safety margins. Systems beat heroism every single time. If your plan requires heroes to succeed, your plan is bad. If your plan creates opportunities for heroism, your plan is terrible. If your plan only works if everything goes perfectly and everyone's constantly brave, you don't have a plan, you have a tragedy waiting for a stage. Here's the uncomfortable truth historians now acknowledge. The Terra Nova expedition's scientific achievements, while real, could have been accomplished without deaths. The geographical goal, reaching the pole, was arbitrary and accomplished nothing practical. The race existed only because Scott created it in his mind and Amundsen obliged. 5 men died for pride, mythology, and a flag planted in ice that no one lives near and fewer people care about. But, and this is important, their deaths weren't meaningless just because they were preventable. The letters Scott wrote, the diary entries, the photographs Ponting took, the way Oates walked into that blizzard, these moments tell us something true about human courage, friendship, and how people face death when it's inevitable. The tragedy isn't that they died bravely, it's that they didn't need to die at all. Feel what that means. Oates' sacrifice was real. His frostbite was real. His decision to die so others might live was genuinely selfless. But it happened in a context of failure, in the service of a doomed expedition that should have been planned better. You can honour his courage while acknowledging that courage was necessary only because leadership was inadequate. The scholarly consensus now, after decades of debate, archive diving and Antarctic experience by modern explorers, is nuanced. Scott was brave but overconfident. He made genuine contributions to science, but prioritised symbolism over survival. He loved his men, but led them to death through preventable mistakes. He was human, flawed, trying his best in circumstances he didn't fully understand and didn't adequately prepare for. Taste the complexity of that truth. It's less satisfying than either pure heroism or pure incompetence. We want our stories simple, hero or villain, triumph or tragedy. Scott is both and neither. A man who did extraordinary things for questionable reasons and paid the ultimate price for ambition untempered by wisdom. Modern explorers who visit Scott's hut at Cape Evans report it's preserved almost perfectly by the cold. Canned food still on shelves, books on the table, clothing hanging on pegs. Time stopped there in 1913 when the survivors sailed home. Walking through it is like walking through a museum of noble failure. Every artefact a reminder that wanting something desperately doesn't make you prepared for it. The cairn where Scott, Wilson and Bowers lie is probably gone now, buried under a century of accumulated snow, moved by the slow grinding of the Ross ice shelf toward the sea. Eventually their frozen bodies will reach the edge, carve off in an iceberg, and drift north into warmer waters where they'll finally thaw after 100 plus years. That feels appropriate somehow, their final journey taking them away from the pole they died trying to reach, dissolving into an ocean that doesn't care about flags or nations or who got there first. You close this script, turn off the light, settle us into your warm bed in your heated room with your full stomach. You'll never face what Scott faced, the cold, the hunger, the slow realization that you're dying and can't stop it. You'll never have to choose between your life and your friend's life. You'll never write final letters knowing they're actually final. But you can learn from his mistakes. You can value competence over appearance. You can listen to experts even when they're foreign or different. You can plan for failure. Build in margins. Admit when you're wrong before it kills people. Listen to the silence in your room. Warm silence, safe silence. The kind of silence that doesn't freeze your breath or threaten your life. Feel grateful for boring, unheroic survival. Taste the mundane miracle of not dying for pointless goals, and remember 5 men who walked into ice and never walked out, who became myths when they should have become old men, who proved that courage without competence is just dying with style. The ice remembers them still. Under the snow, under the weight of Antarctica, under all the memorials and myths and retellings, the truth waits frozen. They didn't have to die. They shouldn't have died. And the fact that they died bravely doesn't change that they died unnecessarily. That's the real tragedy. That's the lesson. That's what happens when ambition meets ice and pride prevents you from backing down. Rest in peace, Terra Nova Party. You deserve better leadership. You deserve to come home. You deserve to grow old telling stories instead of becoming them. You're absolutely Cherry Garrard, and it's 22. You're sitting in your English country house and staring at a manuscript that's taken you 9 years to write. The title sits at the top of the page, The Worst Journey in the World. Your hands shake slightly. They always do now, a tremor that started in Antarctica and never stopped. Listen to the grandfather clock ticking in the corner, each second a reminder that you're alive, and they're not. You were 24 when you sailed on the Terra Nova, the youngest member of the expedition, nearly blind without your thick glasses, paying £1,000 for the privilege of freezing in Antarctica. You survived the winter journey to Cape Crozier, 19 days in -70 cold that should have killed you. But that's not what haunts you. What haunts you is 1 Ton Depot, March 1912, and the decision that killed your friends. Feel the weight of that memory pressing on your chest like physical weight. Scott ordered the dog teams to meet him at 1 Ton Depot around March 1st. You were in charge of the dogs with Dmitry Gerov. You made it to the depot, then you stopped, waited, couldn't navigate farther south without better weather. After a week, you turned back. Scott's party was 11 miles south, dying, so close you could have reached them if you'd pushed farther. Imagine being the person who could have called 911 but didn't because you weren't sure it was an emergency. Now imagine finding out later that those extra minutes would have saved lives. That's your reality for the rest of your existence. Every single day, forever. The guilt is crushing, suffocating, inescapable. You write in your manuscript, whether we could have saved them if we had started from Cape Evans earlier and gone farther south is a question which will always haunt me. The answer you don't write, but everyone knows. Probably yes, maybe definitely yes. If you'd been braver, more decisive, willing to risk the dogs and yourself, you might have reached them in time. You went on the winter journey and survived temperatures that killed thermometers. You hauled sledges until your body broke. You did everything asked of you except the one thing that mattered. Go those extra 11 miles when it counted most. Success and failure measured in distance shorter than your morning commute. Here's what the nightmares look like, the ones that wake you sweating in your warm English bed. You're at 1 Ton Depot, the black flag visible through your foggy glasses. The blizzard is raging but not impossible, just difficult, dangerous, risky. You can push south or turn back. In the dream, you always choose wrong. And sometimes you push south and find them dead anyway, frozen minutes before you arrived. Sometimes you turn back and awake knowing you killed them, through caution. Either way, you wake guilty. The truth is more complicated and worse. You had scurvy starting, your gums bleeding, your strength fading. The dogs were tired. The weather was genuinely terrible. Going farther south might have killed you and accomplished nothing. Or it might have saved 5 men. You'll never know, and the not knowing is its own special torture. Taste the bitterness of survival when better men died. Scott was experienced, brave, a naval captain. Wilson was brilliant, kind, your friend. Bowers was efficient, capable, exactly the kind of person who should live long lives. Oates sacrificed himself nobly. Evans fought until his body couldn't fight anymore. And you're alive because you stayed safe, played it cautious, chose not to risk the final push. The expedition didn't just break your body. Frostbite on your hands, damage to your eyes, the constant tremor. It broke something deeper. You'll spend the rest of your life writing, rewriting, trying to explain what happened and why. The book becomes a masterpiece. Historians call it the best account of polar exploration ever written. But you'll never forgive yourself for writing it from the position of survivor rather than victim. Listen to what you write in the book's dedication. To my Cherry, my best friend through life. Cherry was your family nickname. You're dedicating the book to yourself because you're the one who has to live with what happened. That's either profound self-awareness or tragic narcissism. Probably both. Probably necessary for survival. You attend the memorial services, shake hands with widows, accept condolences like you're grieving instead of guilty. People call you brave. You want to scream that bravery would have been going those extra miles. Prudence saved your life and killed your friends, and everyone's congratulating you for the wrong thing. The years pass slowly. You never marry. How could you? When part of you died at 1 Ton Depot, you live in your family estate, writing, remembering, replaying March 1912 like a film stuck on repeat. The tremor in your hands gets worse. The nightmares never stop. You drink more than you should, sleep less than you need, and carry the weight of 5 frozen bodies on shoulders that were always too small for the burden. Here's the final cruelty. In 959 you'll die at age 73, having lived 47 years longer than Scott's party. 47 years of guilt, memory, and the question that never gets answered. Could you have saved them? Modern historians mostly say no. The weather was impossible, going farther would have killed you too. But mostly isn't definitely, and the gap between those words is where your life happens. You drift towards sleep tonight. 1922, your English bed, your warm room, and think about cold. About that moment at 1 Ton Depot when you chose caution over courage, safety over risk, survival over heroism. Was it the right choice? You'll never know. You'll only know you're alive to ask the question while they're frozen silent under Antarctic ice. And somehow that makes you the unlucky one. You're Tom Crean, Irish farmer's pure son turned Antarctic legend, and March 1912 is trying its best to kill you. 3 men, you, William Lashley, and Lieutenant Edward Evans, are somewhere on the Beardmore Glacier, returning north after Scott sent you back from the final pole push. Evans is dying. Scurvy has him semi-conscious, unable to walk, bleeding from every orifice. Lashley tends him, while you make a decision that will define your life. Listen to the wind howling across the glacier, a constant roar that never stops, never pauses, never gives mercy. Feel the cold biting through every layer of wool and canvas, your beard frozen solid, your hands numb inside mittens that used to be warm. Smell nothing, centers surrendered to temperature, everything reduced to the metallic taste of extreme cold on your tongue. Evans is dying fast. You're 35 miles from help at Hut Point. Someone needs to walk there, alone, without supplies, without rest, and bring back help before Evans dies. The math is simple and terrible. 35 miles in 18 hours or Evans is dead. Going alone means no tent, no sleeping bag, no safety. Going together means everyone dies slower. It's like your car breaks down in the desert, someone's dying of heat stroke, and you have to decide whether to walk to the next town alone or watch them die. Except the desert is frozen. The next town is 35 miles away, and you're already exhausted from weeks of starvation and sledge hauling. You make the choice without drama, without speeches. I'll go, you say, and you just go. February 19th, 1912, you start walking. Feel each step as an act of will. Lift foot, move forward, plant foot, repeat. Your legs are exhausted, muscles depleted from weeks of insufficient rations. Your vision blurs with snowblindness and exhaustion. But you keep walking because the alternative is watching Evans die. The landscape is white emptiness in every direction. No landmarks, no variation, just ice and wind and the possibility of crevasses hidden under snow. You navigate by instinct and desperation, dead reckoning across terrain that all looks the same. Hours pass. You lose track of time, entering that state where walking becomes automatic, mind disconnecting from body to preserve sanity. You're hallucinating by hour 10, seeing buildings on the horizon that aren't there, hearing voices that don't exist, having conversations with people who are either dead or never existed. This is what happens when a human body pushes past its limits. The brain starts lying to make the impossible feel possible. But you keep walking because turning back means failure, and failure means death. You'll later say the walk wasn't that bad, just a bit of a stretch for the legs. This is Irish understatement at its finest, calling a near-death solo march across Antarctic ice. A stretch is like calling World War I a disagreement, or the Titanic slightly damp. You're either the toughest human alive or the worst judge of difficulty. Probably both. Hour 15. Your feet are numb, frostbite definitely setting in. Your hands can barely grip your walking stick. You're eating snow for water, which lowers your body temperature but prevents fatal dehydration. Every breath burns your lungs. Every step feels like your last. And still you walk because stopping means dying, and dying means Evans dies, and you're too stubborn to allow that. Here's the miracle. After 18 hours of walking, you see Hut Point on the horizon. Not a hallucination. Actual buildings, smoke from the chimney. Proof that humans exist somewhere beyond this frozen hell. Feel the relief flooding through your body. Endorphins and adrenaline combining to push you those final steps. You stagger into camp and manage to rasp out Evans, dying 35 miles south. Need help. They see him barely. A rescue party races out with dogs, finds Evans and Lashley still alive, brings them back. Evans survives. He'll live until 72, another 60 years of life bought by your 18-hour walk. And you? You get a brief rest, then it's back to work maintaining the base camp like nothing extraordinary happened. That's the thing about you, Tom Crean. You do impossible things casually. Treat survival as just another day's work. You were on 3 Antarctic expeditions: Discovery, 1901 to 1904, With Scott, Terra Nova, 1910 to 1913, with Scott, and later Endurance, 1914 to 1917, with Shackleton. You survived them all, pulled sledges until your body broke, saved lives through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit, and came home to open a pub in Ireland called the South Pole Inn. Listen to what that means. You went to the literal end of the earth 3 times, nearly died repeatedly, watched friends freeze to death, and your response was to open a pub where you rarely talked about Antarctica. When people asked about your adventures, you'd change the subject or make a joke. The heroism was private, the trauma unspoken, the survival taken as just what you did because someone had to. You weren't on the final pole party. Scott sent you back just 150 miles from the goal, and you wept openly at the rejection. Being excluded saved your life. Sometimes the worst disappointment is the best luck disguised as failure. You wanted glory, you got survival. Decades later, which one matters more? Taste the strange satisfaction of outliving tragedy. You're alive in 1938 when you die peacefully at age 1, not frozen, not starving, not sacrificing yourself in a blizzard. Just an old Irishman who happened to walk across Antarctic glaciers like it was no big deal. Your grave in Ireland doesn't mention Antarctica. Most of your neighbours never knew you were a polar explorer. You kept it quiet, private, something that happened to someone else in another life. Modern historians consider you one of the greatest Antarctic explorers who ever lived. Not the most famous, but the most consistently competent, the most reliably heroic, the man who saved lives through impossible acts treated as routine. You never wrote a book, never gave lectures, never sought fame. You just did what needed doing, then went home and pulled pints in a pub named after a place you nearly died reaching. You drift towards sleep tonight, 1938, your Irish bed, your warm room, and sometimes you dream about walking. Endless walking across white nothing, 1 foot, another, hours stretching into eternity. But in the dreams you're not scared, not even uncomfortable. Just walking because someone needs you to, because stopping isn't an option, because that's what you do. And when you wake, you're proud not of the walking but of the arriving. Proof that impossible is just another word for difficult, and difficult is just another kind of Tuesday. You're standing in Antarctica in 1929, 17 years after Scott died, and everything has changed. The ice shelf sounds different now. Listen to the buzz of airplane engines overhead as Richard Byrd's expedition uses actual aircraft to map territory that took Scott months to cross on foot. Feel the vibration of mechanized tractors pulling sledges, modern motors that actually work in cold because engineers learned from Scott's failures. Smell aviation fuel and exhaust mixing with clean Antarctic air. Progress invading the last pristine place. Scott's expedition didn't just fail. It taught the world how not to explore Antarctica. Every mistake became a lesson, every death a cautionary tale, every frozen diary entry an instruction manual for what to avoid. Modern expeditions study the Terra Nova disaster like medical students study famous surgical errors. Here's where everything went wrong, here's how to prevent it happening to you. The dog debate is settled. Dogs work. Period. Amundsen proved it, Scott's failure confirmed it, and every subsequent expedition uses dogs extensively until snowmobiles replace them decades later. Man-hauling disappears as a primary method, remembered only as that thing brave idiots did before they knew better. It's not more noble, it's just more deadly, and dead men don't finish expeditions. It's like if someone insisted on crossing the country on horseback while everyone else flew, then died halfway and got called a hero for trying. Eventually, people stop calling it heroic and start calling it stupid. Scott straddles that line uncomfortably, brave enough to attempt, foolish enough to fail preventably. The equipment changes, dramatically. Clothing moves from heavy wool to layered insulation, from cotton windbreakers that froze solid to synthetic materials engineered for extreme cold. Sleeping bags evolve from reindeer fur that trapped sweat to designs that actually stay dry. Stoves get more efficient, tents get stronger. Every piece of gear reflects lessons learned from Scott's party freezing 11 miles from salvation. Food calculations get serious. Nutritionists study the Terra Nova rations and conclude, yeah, no wonder they died. They were eating maybe 6% of required calories while burning energy like furnaces. Modern expeditions carry calorie-dense foods, supplement with vitamins, understand that cold survival requires eating like you ate. You're training for an ultramarathon while wearing a refrigerator. The 4,500 calorie ration becomes a historical footnote labelled, "Don't do this." Listen to what explorers say now. Scott's biggest mistake was pride. Pride in British methods, pride in man-hauling, pride that prevented him from learning from Norwegians, from Inuit, from anyone who actually knew how to survive in extreme cold. The expeditions that follow Terra Nova are less proud, more practical. They borrow techniques from anyone who works, regardless of national origin or whether it looks impressive in photographs. The scientific legacy is complex. Yes, Scott's party collected valuable geological samples, including those 35 pounds of fossils they carried to their deaths. Those samples helped prove Antarctica was once warm, supported continental drift theory, advanced geology significantly. But was it worth 5 lives? Modern scientists say, important discoveries, terrible costs should have been done differently. Science requires data, not martyrs. Scott wanted to do both, win the race and do comprehensive science. Amundsen wanted to win the race, full stop. One approach keeps everyone alive, the other creates dramatic frozen corpses and guilt-ridden survivors. Guess which one modern expeditions emulate? Here's the shift that matters most. After Terra Nova, Antarctic exploration becomes professional rather than amateur. No more rich gentlemen funding vanity projects with insufficient preparation. Expeditions get planned by experts, supplied by logistics professionals, led by people who know what they're doing, instead of naval officers cosplaying as explorers. The romantic age of exploration dies with Scott, replaced by systematic, boring, effective methodology that keeps people alive. You see it in everything. Bases get built with proper insulation, heating, communication systems. Routes get established with regular supply depots, emergency caches, backup plans for the backup plans. Dogs give way to mechanical transport that actually functions. Eventually, satellites provide weather forecasting, GPS eliminates navigation errors, and the entire enterprise becomes as routine as dangerous work can be. The Terra Nova expedition becomes a case study in risk management classes. Here's what happens when ambition exceeds preparation, when pride prevents learning, when good intentions substitute for good planning. Business schools teach it. Military academies study it. Anyone leading people into dangerous situations learns from Scott's mistakes because the alternative is repeating them. Taste the bitter legacy of noble failure. Scott wanted to be remembered as the man who reached the pole first. Instead, he's remembered as the man who died trying, who wrote beautiful tragic letters, who created martyrs when he could have created veterans. Is that better or worse than Amundsen's competent success? Depends whether you value inspiration or survival. By the 1950s, Antarctica has permanent research stations, international cooperation, scientific instruments measuring everything from ice cores to cosmic rays. The continent Scott struggled to cross gets traversed by tractors pulling living quarters. The pole he died reaching becomes home to a year-round research station where scientists live comfortably at 90 degrees south. Progress erases difficulty, technology defeats ice, and Scott's suffering becomes historical curiosity rather than inevitable fate. You stand in modern Antarctica, let's say 2025, wearing synthetic fibre clothing rated for -60, eating freeze-dried meals with proper calorie counts, communicating via satellite phone, watching weather radar predict storms days in advance. Scott would recognise nothing about this except the ice. The brutality he faced has been engineered into manageable risk, the impossible made merely difficult. Listen to modern Antarctic researchers talk about Scott. Respect for courage, criticism for judgment, appreciation for what he taught through failure. He's not a villain, he's a well-intentioned leader who got it wrong in ways that killed people. That's not tragic heroism, that's cautionary tale. The ultimate question historians still debate: if Terra Nova had succeeded, if Scott beat Amundsen, reached the pole first, got everyone home safely, would we remember it at all? Probably not beyond academic footnotes. Success would have been just another expedition, another flag planted, another line on a map. But failure, dramatic photogenic failure with diary entries and noble deaths, that becomes immortal. Scott didn't just fail to reach the pole first, he failed so perfectly, so completely, with such well-documented tragedy, that his failure became more memorable than most successes. Is that a win? In the economy of human memory and historical significance, maybe. Maybe that's the consolation prize for freezing to death 11 miles from salvation. At least everyone remembers you tried. You drift towards sleep tonight, whenever tonight is, wherever you are, and think about ice, about how humans keep throwing themselves at it, conquering it not through bravery but through learning from the brave dead. Scott's gift wasn't reaching the pole, it was teaching everyone else how to survive the attempt. That's legacy, that's what changes, that's what matters after the memorials fade and the myths give way to truth. You're Roald Amundsen, and it's 1912. You've won. You reached the South Pole first by 34 days, with all your men alive and well fed. Your dogs survived, your equipment worked, your planning was flawless, you did everything right. So why does it feel so wrong? Listen to the silence in the Norwegian newspapers. Your triumph is announced, celebrated briefly, then overshadowed completely by Scott's death. The British press portrays you as the villain, the sneaky Norwegian who ambushed poor Scott by not telling him about your route change, who used dogs, unsportsmanlike, who prioritised winning over science. Feel the unfairness burning in your chest. You played by every rule, and you're somehow the bad guy. Imagine training harder than your competitor, executing perfectly, winning decisively, then having everyone sympathise with the loser because they died trying. Your victory becomes their tragedy's footnote. You're the asterisk in someone else's heroic story. That's your legacy forever. The facts are clear. You learned from Inuit techniques, studied Arctic survival for years, brought proper equipment and adequate food. You started from the Bay of Whales, 60 miles closer to the pole than Scott's Cape Evans base. You used dogs efficiently, killed them for food as planned, and maintained energy reserves throughout. Your party ate well, stayed healthy, and covered distance rapidly. Everything worked because you planned for everything to work. But efficiency isn't romantic. Competence doesn't inspire poetry. Success without suffering makes boring headlines. Scott's frozen diary gets published worldwide. Your methodical planning documents gather to dust. Scott's last letters become literary classics. Your triumphant telegrams read like grocery lists. He died nobly, you just succeeded, boringly, completely, anticlimactically. Here's what haunts you. You didn't know Scott was dying while you were sailing home. You reached the pole December 14th, 1911, left supplies and a letter, then departed while Scott's party was still trudging south. You were back at your base camp, Framheim, by January 25th, 1912. Warm, safe, victorious. Scott reached the pole January 17th and started dying immediately. You celebrated while they froze. Taste the guilt that shouldn't exist but does. You didn't kill Scott. His own poor planning killed him. You didn't force the race. Scott created it in his mind and acted accordingly. You didn't prevent the rescue. British incompetence did that. But somehow, in the court of public opinion, your success enabled his failure. Your efficiency highlighted his mistakes. Your survival made his death more tragic. Through contrast. You win the race but lose the publicity war. Scott comes second but wins the sympathy championship. In the long run, everyone remembers the glorious British failure more fondly than the boring Norwegian success. Losing correctly beats winning anonymously. The truth is more complex and darker. You changed your plan secretly, announcing you were going to the North Pole, then heading south instead. Your own crew didn't know until you revealed it at sea. This wasn't exactly cheating, but it wasn't exactly sporting either. You wanted to win, full stop, and you optimised for winning without worrying about appearances or British notions of fair play. That makes you smart, not villainous. But smart doesn't get statues. Listen to what you say in interviews. Defensive even while victorious. The pole was virgin territory, available to anyone. I got there first using better methods. Why am I blamed for Scott's mistakes? The answer never satisfies you, because tragedy needs a villain, and the competent winner is easier to resent than the incompetent dead. You continue exploring northern passages, Arctic flights, pushing boundaries with the same methodical competence that won you the pole. But the shadow of Scott's death follows you. Every article mentions it. Amundsen, who beat Scott, as if your primary achievement was being slightly faster than a dying man, rather than being extraordinarily skilled at a polar survival. Here's the final irony. In Night 28, you die heroically. Your plane disappears while searching for a missing Italian expedition in the Arctic. You vanish into ice and snow, never found, presumed dead trying to save others. Finally, at age 55, you get your tragic ending, the redemptive death that makes you sympathetic rather than just successful. Modern analysts recognise your genius now. You revolutionised polar exploration through proper preparation, studied indigenous techniques instead of dismissing them, prioritised survival over symbolism. Every successful Antarctic expedition since Terra uses methods closer to yours than Scott's. You won not just the race, but the argument about how exploration should be done. But in Captain 12, sitting in Norway reading British newspapers that paint you as the villain in Scott's tragedy, you feel hollow. Victory without recognition, success without celebration, competence punished by public perception. You did everything right and somehow that makes you wrong. You drift towards sleep that night, 1912, your Norwegian bed, your warm room, and think about ice, about how you conquered it through preparation while Scott faced it through courage. And somehow courage looks better in history books than preparation. You wonder if winning was worth the eternal role of villain in someone else's heroic epic. And decades later, when your plane disappears into Arctic ice, maybe part of you is relieved. Finally, your own tragic ending. Finally, sympathy instead of resentment. Finally, you get to be the hero dying nobly instead of the winner everyone resents. The ice takes everyone eventually. At least now it's taking you on your terms. You're standing on Antarctic ice in your own imagination. No specific year, no specific place, just the concept of the continent where humans discovered their limits. Listen to the wind that never stops, the grinding of glaciers that move at geological pace, the absolute sense beneath the noise that reminds you how small you are. Feel the cold that killed Scott, that Amundsen conquered, that modern explorers engineer around. This is what Antarctica teaches. Respect the ice or die trying not to. The Terra expedition asks uncomfortable questions we're still answering. When does bravery become foolishness? At what point does determination cross into stubbornness? How much suffering is acceptable in pursuit of arbitrary goals? Scott's party died 11 miles from salvation because their leader couldn't admit failure soon enough to save them. That's not tragedy. That's choice, consequence, physics. It's like someone maxing out credit cards, ignoring warnings, refusing to file bankruptcy, then losing everything and being called brave for trying. At some point, bravery without wisdom is just expensive failure. Scott was brave, Scott was also wrong. Or among both things are true, and pretending otherwise dishonours the dead by misunderstanding how they died. Here's what Antarctica teaches about human nature. We're persistence predators in a world that increasingly requires intelligence over endurance. Scott tried to muscle through Antarctica via sheer British determination. The ice didn't care. Amundsen studied, prepared, adapted. The ice rewarded competence. Evolution selected for humans who could think their way out of problems, but we romanticize those who suffer through them instead. Taste the bitter lesson. Noble suffering achieves less than boring preparation. Scott's party suffered magnificently and died. Amundsen's party planned methodically and survived. Which one do we celebrate? The suffering, because it makes better stories. Which one should we emulate? The preparation, because it keeps people alive. We know the right answer, but choose the wrong one repeatedly because their tragedy feels more meaningful than success. Listen to modern Antarctica, research stations, tourist cruises, marathons at the South Pole, regular flights overhead. The continent has been domesticated through technology, reduced from killer to inconvenience. Scott would be horrified or vindicated depending on interpretation. Horrified that suffering has been engineered away, or vindicated that his sacrifice taught future generations how to survive. We've made Antarctica safe enough that paying tourists visit the South Pole for selfies. People jog there in organised races. Scientists live year-round in heated buildings with internet and fresh food. Scott died for a destination that's now a tourist attraction with a gift shop. Progress makes martyrs look unnecessary in retrospect, which is either beautiful or heartbreaking depending on your perspective. The geological samples Scott's party died carrying are in museums now, 35 pounds of rocks that helped prove continental drift, that showed Antarctica was once tropical, that advanced science significantly. But here's the question. Could those samples have been collected on a better planned expedition that didn't kill everyone? Unquestionably yes. Does that diminish their value? Not to geology. Does it diminish Scott's sacrifice? That's the debate. Feel the weight of that complexity. The science was valuable. The deaths were preventable. Both statements coexist uncomfortably, refusing to resolve into simple heroism or simple failure. Scott wasn't a hero or a fool. He was human, ambitious, flawed, brave, stubborn, caring, wrong, and dead. Reducing him to either saint or villain misses the point. He was a person who made decisions that killed people, including himself. Here's what we learn from Cherry Garrard's guilt. Sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. He couldn't have saved them. Probably maybe, the historians mostly agree, but probably leaves room for doubt. And doubt is where guilt lives forever. The lesson isn't that he should have done more. It's that impossible situations create impossible choices, and surviving them means carrying weight others don't see. Here's what we learn from Tom Crean's walk. Impossible is negotiable. 35 miles alone across Antarctic ice in 18 hours while exhausted and starving should be impossible. Crean did it anyway because the alternative was unacceptable. The lesson isn't that we should attempt impossible things, it's that sometimes the only way out is through, and through requires accepting pain as temporary instead of terminal. Here's what we learn from Amundsen's competence. Boring wins, study, prepare, learn from experts, prioritise function over form, accept that efficiency beats elegance. This applies to everything: business, relationships, survival, life. The flashy dramatic gesture gets remembered, but the methodical professional gets results. Choose accordingly based on whether you want fame or survival. Taste the modern application. How many times do we choose Scott's approach over Amundsen's? How often do we value looking heroic over being effective? How many corporate disasters, political failures, personal tragedies happen because people prioritise appearance over preparation, pride over learning, symbolic victory over actual survival? Antarctica holds lessons we keep refusing to learn. It's still there, still cold, still indifferent to human ambition. The ice that killed Scott hasn't changed. We have the slowly, expensively, through accumulated failures that taught us what the ice demanded all along. Respect, preparation, humility. Listen to what the wind says, carrying across decades. The ice doesn't care about your empire, your flag, your noble intentions. It cares about heat loss and calorie deficits and whether your equipment actually works. Everything else is human drama projected onto indifferent physics. The ice will outlast every human story, every memorial, every debate about who was hero and who was fool. You drift towards sleep thinking about ice, about how it teaches through killing, how it demands competence we keep mistaking for cowardice. The lesson is simple. Pride costs lives. Preparation saves them. Tragedy happens when we confuse which is which. You're lying in your warm bed right now, reading this script at whatever time you started, in whatever city you called home enough to comment. Listen to the sound of your room, maybe a fan, maybe traffic outside, maybe nothing but your own breathing. Feel the blanket's weight, the pillow's softness, the absolute miracle of being warm without effort. This is what Scott died for, the assumption that you'd have these comforts, that civilization would continue, that someone a century later would remember his frozen diary. The Terra expedition ended November 1913 when the ship finally left Antarctica for the last time, carrying survivors, specimens, photographs, and the weight of 5 deaths that changed nothing and everything. The world kept turning. Antarctica stayed frozen. And somewhere on the Ross Ice Shelf under accumulating snow, 3 men slept in their tent like they're sleeping still. Modern Antarctica knows nothing of their suffering. The pole, they died reaching, hosts a research station where scientists work year-round, heated buildings and internet and regular supply flights. The ice shelf they cross by hand-hauling sledges now gets traversed by tracked vehicles in days instead of months. Progress erased their struggle, made their deaths look unnecessary in hindsight, which might be the cruelest monument of all. Taste the strange comfort of historical distance. You can read about their deaths without the visceral horror of watching them happen. You can analyse Scott's mistakes without freezing to death because of them. You can judge Amundsen's methods without your survival depending on them. History gives us the luxury of certainty, We know how it ends, who lives, who dies, what worked, and what didn't. Here's what you carry forward from this story. 5 men walked into ice and never walked out. They weren't monsters or saints, just humans who wanted to accomplish something difficult and paid for it with everything. They made mistakes, showed courage, experienced friendship, faced death, and left us letters that still hurt to read because they are addressed to people long dead from people longer dead. Listen to what Scott wrote in his final message. For God's sake, look after our people. Not remember me as a hero or praise my courage. Just take care of the families we're leaving behind. That's the last thing he asked for. Dying in a tent, knowing these were his final words. How's that for priorities? Not personal legacy, but practical care for survivors. Feel what that means. In the end, the grand ambitions, first to the pole, glory for Britain, advancing human knowledge, reduced down to basic human love. Take care of my wife. Support Wilson's widow. Don't let Oates' mother think he died for nothing. Help Cherry Garrard forgive himself. The dying didn't care about history's judgment. They cared about the people they loved. Everything else was wind and ice and words that froze mid-sentence. Scott's final diary entry is, "It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more." That's such perfect British understatement, calling death a pity, like it's mildly disappointing weather. Even dying of starvation 11 miles from salvation, he's understating. That's either admirable stoicism or tragic inability to admit how badly things went wrong. Probably both. Definitely very Scott. Modern explorers who visit the gravesite report an eerie quiet. The wind stops sometimes, rarely. And in those moments you can hear nothing. No sound at all. Complete silence, like the world is holding its breath. People stand there thinking about how close Scott was to survival. About 11 miles that might as well have been 11,000. About how random chance and bad weather and accumulated mistakes created one of history's most famous deaths. You've read this whole script, approximately 20,000 words about ice, death, hubris, humanity, and what happens when ambition meets Antarctic reality. You've followed 15 men south, watched 5 die, survived with the guilt-ridden remainder, and learned lessons that apply to everything despite happening nowhere most people will ever go. So what now? You close this script, turn off your device, settle into sleep in your warm room with your full belly and your beating heart. Tomorrow you'll wake up, live your life, face challenges that aren't frozen death but might feel like it sometimes. What does Scott's failure teach you about your successes? What does Amundsen's competence suggest about your planning? What does Cherry Garrard's guilt reveal about your own choices? Listen to the silence in your room, safe silence, living silence, the sound of not dying that we take for granted, until someone reminds us people freeze to death chasing arbitrary goals. Feel grateful for boring, unheroic survival. Taste the mundane miracle of waking up tomorrow. The ice is still there, unchanged, indifferent, waiting. Antarctica doesn't care that we've put stations on it, crossed it with machines, mapped it from satellites. It's still the continent that killed Scott, that tested Amundsen, that breaks humans who approach without proper respect. The ice remembers nothing and teaches everything. Respect limits or become a cautionary tale. Pride costs lives. Preparation saves them. You drift towards sleep now, real sleep, not the frozen kind, and maybe you dream about ice, about walking endlessly across white nothing, each step both progress and punishment. About cold that penetrates everything, about hunger that never stops gnawing, about friends dying while you watch helplessly. But then you wake, warm and alive, and realise it was just a dream. For Scott, Wilson, Bowers, Oates and Evans, the dream never ended. They're still in that tent, frozen in the moment when they realised survival wasn't coming. When the blizzard wouldn't stop, when 11 miles was infinitely far. They're still writing last letters, still hoping for rescue that's 8 months away. Still human and afraid and brave and wrong. Remember them not as heroes or fools, but as people who tried something hard and failed preventably. Honour them by learning from their mistakes instead of romanticising their deaths. Respect their courage while acknowledging their poor planning. Feel sad they died while being grateful that their deaths taught us how not to die the same way. And tomorrow, When you make decisions, small ones about breakfast, big ones about career, medium ones about relationships, remember, pride costs more than it's worth. Preparation beats drama. Boring competence outlives flashy heroism. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're wrong early enough to survive. The wind howls across Antarctic ice tonight, same as it did 113 years ago when Scott's party froze. The continent hasn't changed. We have, slowly, through accumulated wisdom, paid for in frozen bodies. That's the cost of progress. Someone has to die first so others learn what not to do. Scott's gift to us wasn't reaching the pole. It was teaching everyone after him how to survive the attempt. That's legacy. That's meaning. That's what matters when the myths fade and the truth remains frozen in time. Listen to the silence one last time, then sleep, warm and safe, having learned what ice teaches without paying its price. Rest well, Terra Nova Party. Your suffering wasn't meaningless. It just meant something different than you thought. You wanted to be first. Instead, you became the lesson everyone remembers. And in the economy of human memory, maybe that's enough.